that I was flying out for 3 days to fix Brad Jr.'s mistakes. I needed to ensure we didn't lose the contract. When I talked to the client, they were hesitant after seeing what my brother submitted. I realized I had to meet them in person to resolve the issues. Otherwise, our family business could face some tough times ahead. Our family business, Total Build, creates portable homes across the country. Our houses are small and cater to specific markets, always designed to be mobile. If you've ever stayed in one of those little houses at a caravan park, that's us. We're the ones to contact if you want a cozy cabin by the beach or in the outback. My name is Robert Other, but everyone calls me Robbie. At the start of this story, I was the operations manager for our family business, where my entire family worked, including my wife. However, Georgia had to stop working a couple of months ago because she was 6 months pregnant with our first child. As the operations manager at Total Build, I handled logistics, shipping, resources, and people. I also managed finances and sales, making sure our 30 staff members knew what to build and how. My parents were part of the executive team, my sister worked in administration at the factory, and my older brother was in sales. Brad wasn't the best salesperson, but my parents seemed to think he was special, which I never understood. From the outside, we looked like a typical family. You know the kind, mom, dad, and 3 kids. We had our arguments, but I believed we always supported each other when help was needed. As I rushed home to pack a bag for my flight, Georgia was sitting on the bed, gently holding her growing belly. She looked beautiful, reminding me that I should stay home. But instead of enjoying the moment, I was busy complaining about my brother's latest errors while packing my bag for the trip. She tried to speak when I paused to catch my breath, looking for my toothbrush and deodorant in the bathroom. "Robbie," Georgia said to me in a slightly bossy way, "you know he means well. Brad is good at his job, but he's not great with numbers like you." This was an old topic we often discussed. I glanced at her as I packed a few more things into my suitcase, feeling tired. "Georgia, I understand, but I'm fed up with cleaning up his mistakes every time he gets it wrong. No one, not even my wife, seems to care that I spend so much time traveling to fix things. If I don't give Joanna the right information over and over, the work gets delayed. And if I don't check the finances for Mom or write the message for Dad about the company, we wouldn't have a company to work with." I sighed again, feeling frustrated. In that moment, I felt like the most overworked and unappreciated person in the family. No one ever bothered to see if I was okay. Yes, I was paid well for my work, which I made sure of since I handled the company's money. I knew what everyone earned, so that was one thing I could count on. But it always felt like I was left out. They needed me, but I was never really included in their close circle or family discussions. It was disheartening. Right then, I hated being the youngest. Georgia must have sensed my gloomy thoughts while I was packing my dress shoes. She came over and wrapped an arm around me. "Robbie, I'm sorry," Georgia said, trying to comfort me. "You are right. You do a lot of work, but soon we'll have our baby to care for. Brad and your family need to step up, because you will be a dad." I smiled at that thought, reaching to touch her pregnant belly. "You'll be back in 3 days?" my wife asked as I looked at her with the child growing inside. "Yeah, I should be back Friday evening," I answered, pulling my gaze from her belly to her eyes. "He'll deal with the latest mess from Brad, and then get ready for the next one." I glanced back at her round tummy. "I swear this baby will be easier to handle than this family." Feeling resigned to my role as the family worker, I drove from the Gold Coast to Brisbane and caught my flight to Melbourne. I did this so often now that I had a routine. First, I read a couple of chapters of a book during takeoff. Then, I worked for an hour once we reached cruising altitude and watched a movie until we landed. The next day passed quickly as I met with the client's team to go over their quote. They were happy that I took the time to meet with them in person. They were really pleased with how I presented everything, and they decided to order 15 more units right on the spot. This added almost 40% to the quote. I was really happy because I knew that this would help us reach our financial goals 3 months earlier than we thought. When I walked out that Wednesday afternoon, I had finished my work 2 days ahead of schedule. I considered spending some time in Melbourne. I thought about grabbing a meal at one of the nice alley restaurants or having a drink at one of the unique bars. Melbourne has so much to offer. However, I missed my wife. I remembered how I had been talking to Georgia about my brother and my family the night before, so I thought it might be nice to come home early. I wanted to be there for her as she entered the last part of her pregnancy. After using my phone for internet access all day, the battery was almost dead. I had just enough charge left to order an Uber to the airport. Since I flew often, changing my flight was simple. I even treated myself a bit by using reward points to upgrade to business class at the front of the plane for the trip back. I only had a few minutes to spare before the flight, but I made it to the gate just in time. I felt great when I got off the plane. We went through a storm while landing, and watching the lightning through the clouds was thrilling. After landing back in Brisbane, I jumped into my utility vehicle, which we call a ute in Australia, to drive back down to the Gold Coast. My 3-year-old Ford Ranger wasn't the fastest, but it was a company lease, like all the family cars. I found my Ranger useful for moving things between sites now and then. I never minded getting my hands dirty with the teams. Like the other guys in the other family, I was a big, strong guy, and I thought having my ute showed that I treated everyone equally. Once in the vehicle, I plugged in my phone for the drive home and tried to call Georgia a couple of times, leaving messages that I would be home soon since I took an early flight. But they all went to voicemail. A little over an hour later, I frowned when I couldn't pull into my driveway. Brad's car was parked where I usually parked. I was curious about why my older brother was there so late. But being a trusting person, I didn't think anything was wrong. I parked, grabbed my travel bag from the passenger seat, and walked in through the side door like I always did. Just as I was about to say hello, I heard a sound that made me freeze in my tracks. It was a feeling that made my stomach drop. Standing at the end of the hallway leading to my bedroom, I realized I could hear unexpected noises that made me feel uneasy. I stood in the hallway, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. I didn't want to look, but something in me knew I had to face the truth, painful as it might be. If I didn't, I would always wonder, always question what was real. I needed to confront what was happening, even though it was the last thing I wanted to see. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone, switched it to record, and crept quietly down the hallway. I felt that I needed proof, something concrete, before I could address this betrayal. So, I positioned myself outside the master bedroom, hidden in the shadows. I thought I was ready for whatever I might find, but I couldn't have been more wrong. My wife, Georgia, had always been a beautiful woman. She had deep brown hair, kind brown eyes, and a warm smile that could light up a room. She was tall and had an athletic build, always carrying herself with confidence. I'd always loved her energy, her laughter, her warmth. She was a big part of what made our home feel whole. But as I stood there, I saw her with someone else, and my heart sank. I held my phone tightly, emotions swirling inside me, anger, pain, and sadness mixed with the remnants of love and memories we had shared. Watching her with my own brother was a blow I never imagined I'd face. It hurt deeply, like a crack running through everything I'd believed was solid. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control. How could the two people closest to me do this? I struggled to understand, feeling as if the ground had fallen away beneath me. There were no words spoken that could make it better or undo what Eid just witnessed. The trust I had was broken, and I knew that nothing could bring things back to how they were before. For a few moments, I stood in silence, my heart heavy and my mind reeling. I knew my life had changed in that instant, and while I didn't know what would come next, I had seen enough. I stood there, feeling the weight of betrayal crush me. I thought I could face this without breaking, but I was wrong. My heart pounded, and anger bubbled up as I listened to the two people closest to me, my wife Georgia and my older brother Brad, speak words that shattered my last bit of trust. As they talked, Georgia and Brad seemed to laugh off any sense of loyalty or guilt. Brad joked about how easily he could keep secrets, even arranging situations to get me out of town so he could spend time with Georgia behind my back. The casual way they spoke hurt more than I thought possible. Georgia tried to defend me briefly, but her words faded, and soon it was clear that any respect they'd had for me was gone. I watched them, my mind spinning, as Brad spoke with no shame, sharing a truth that cut deeper than any of their laughter. His words made it clear that the child Georgia was carrying wasn't mine. He even made a twisted joke about how I'd unknowingly raise his child as my own, as he went on with his life, leaning on me to handle things he couldn't. The shock and anger I felt at that moment were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My heart felt torn open, and it was clear there was nothing left between us. I knew then that whatever Wed had, whatever I'd believed in, was over. I took a few steps forward, finally making myself known. They turned, startled, seeing me there, but I spoke before either could try to explain. "It's over," I said, my voice steady but cold. "There will be no more lies and no more pretending. I'm done with both of you." The look of shock on their faces was almost poetic. The scramble, the sudden panic they were trying to cover up as if that would change what had happened, but nothing could undo the damage. And I had already seen enough. Brad and Georgia were no different. They scrambled to cover themselves. I stood there for a moment, realizing I was the one in the doorway talking to them. Their eyes widened in shock. Brad spoke first. "Robbie, what are you doing here? You were supposed to be in Melbourne?" He tried to sound casual, like we were at a family gathering. "I was in Melbourne," I shot back. "And I managed to fix your mess really quick. So quick, in fact, that I thought I'd come home to spend some time with my wife. But it seems I'm not needed." "Robbie, my love, it's not." Georgia began softly, then paused, realizing it wouldn't help. "What it looks like," I finished for her, frustration boiling inside me. "You'll say it was just a mistake next, right? Or maybe you'll tell me I imagined my brother was here with you." I glared at them. "Let's just say I wasn't here when my child was conceived. Both of you can deal with the consequences." I stared hard at them for a moment, clenching my fists but stopping myself. Georgia looked scared and panicked as she held the sheet around her. Brad just stared at me, a confused look on his face. "I'm leaving now," I said sharply to the two in my bed. "I'll be back in a couple of hours to get my things and move out. I suggest you both be gone by then." As I turned to go, Brad sprang up from the bed, looking disheveled. "Robbie, I know this is tough, but you can't just walk out. If you do, I'll have to stop you." He stepped toward me with a dark smile. "You might not like it, but we need to talk, and I won't back down until you do." I laughed and raised an eyebrow. "You think you can stop me? You who quit karate before getting a white belt?" I grinned. "You know I have a black belt, right? Plus all that training in martial arts? You really think you can take me on? Just so you know, I said, glaring at my older brother with strong feelings of anger. I felt the anger boiling up inside me as I stood in that room, my mind racing. I took a breath, trying to hold it together, and looked at them one last time, the pain clear in my eyes. If either of you ever tries to come near me again, don't expect any mercy, I said, my voice low and filled with bitterness. Brad took a step back, and Georgia looked away, covering her face with the sheets. You both disgust me. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, heading down the hallway, my heart heavy. I didn't hear them call out or try to stop me. Just silence as I left the house, fury and sadness swirling inside me. Before getting into my truck, I called back, "Don't be here when I get back." As I drove away, I saw the curtains shift, a glimpse of them watching me leave. I gripped the steering wheel, my thoughts a mess, feeling a deep betrayal that tore at me. After a few minutes, I took a deep breath and decided to head to my parents' house. It felt like the only safe place I could think of in that moment. When I pulled up, my mom and dad were already standing on the porch, waiting. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward them, the pain on my face impossible to hide. "Hi, Robbie," my mom said softly. "Son," my dad said, his voice steady but solemn, a tone I wasn't used to hearing from him. They both looked at me, but there was something distant in their eyes. A sinking feeling settled in as I realized what that look meant. They knew. My own parents had known. "No, please," I stammered, my voice breaking. "Tell me you didn't know, tell me you didn't hide this from me." My mom took a small step forward, glancing at my dad before saying, "We're sorry, Robbie. It's just—" I cut her off, a mix of anger and sadness in my voice. "Sorry? You're sorry?" My voice shook. How long? How long have you both known that this has been happening in my own home?" "Now, son," my dad said, trying to stay calm, "watch how you speak to your mother. We didn't raise you to act like this." His words caught me off guard, not with understanding, but with a cold disapproval, as though I'd done something wrong. "Answer me," I said, barely able to hold back the pain. "How long have you both known?" My mom looked down, avoiding my eyes before looking back at me, regret written faintly in her expression. My dad, however, showed no sign of remorse, only a hardened look. 3 years, she finally said, her voice quiet. "We've known for almost the whole time." The weight of her words sank in, a fresh wave of betrayal hitting me harder than I'd thought possible. How could you?" I asked, my voice a whisper, struggling to understand the extent of their silence. "Now, son, there's no need to raise your voice at us." My father started to speak. "Were your pair—" "Enough, Dad." I cut him off, emphasizing "Dad" with heavy sarcasm. I could sense the neighbors peeking from their windows, watching this scene unfold, but I didn't care. "You knew your eldest son was betraying me with my own wife for 3 years, and you said nothing. Not a word to me. Some model parents you turned out to be. I'm guessing you even know the child Georgia is carrying isn't mine but his?" They said nothing, just looked at me. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. My head throbbed as anger and hurt clouded my thoughts. I took deep breaths, drawing on the self-control I'd learned in martial arts to steady myself. We all stood there, locked in silence. I tilted my head, my eyes fixed on them. "Did Joanna know?" I asked. Without thinking, my mom replied, "She's the one who caught them. She stopped by while you were away and found them together." "I see," I said, my voice hollow. Dad began to say something, but I held up my hand. No, don't bother. I understand now. I am just the naive younger son, too trusting to see what's right in front of me. So, you all decided to keep me in the dark while my own brother was with my wife. And then, you sent me off to clean up his messes so he could be here, doing this behind my back. Son, it's not as simple as that, Dad tried. Isn't it? I replied sharply, my words cutting through the air. My father took a step back, perhaps reminded of the training he had once encouraged me to pursue. Robbie, please, my mother pleaded, glancing toward the neighbors' windows. Come inside, sit down, let's talk about this. There has to be a way for you, Brad, and Georgia to work this out. Work this out? I echoed, incredulous. Do you hear yourself? It sounds like you're suggesting I just shrug off this betrayal. Like I'm supposed to say, oh, no worries. I'll just get over the fact that everyone I trusted kept this secret from me for 3 years. Or maybe, thanks for sending me out of town, so my own brother could spend time alone with my wife in our home. I looked at them, and then a bitter laugh escaped me. My voice turned hollow, almost mocking as I spread my hands in the air. Oh, here's a good one. Sorry for hiding that your wife is carrying your brother's child. We thought it would be okay to let you raise his child without telling you. I stopped pretending and looked at the woman I once believed was a caring mother. No, I asked, waiting for an answer, but none came. Is this what you wanted, Mom? To have me raise Brad's child without knowing the truth? I finished. She turned her gaze away from me. I felt like this was what my parents hoped for all along. I stared at her, confused about who these people were. Listen, son, Dad said. We understand that you're upset and hurt. Maybe if you calm down, I interrupted him. Calm? There is no calm. Can't you both see I feel like this whole family has betrayed me? And not only do you not understand why I feel this way, but you're asking me to accept it. That's just wrong. Worst of all, I don't see any regret for the hurt you are causing me. They were silent again, staring at me as if they were visitors from another world trying to understand human feelings. The unspoken words could fill a library. They truly believed I should just accept the situation, even if I wasn't okay with it. For the first time since I arrived, I looked away from my parents. My shoulders felt heavy, and I sensed a glimmer of understanding from my mother. She moved toward me, and I picked up on it. My posture straightened again, and I spoke quietly but firmly. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, feeling the start of a plea in my voice. Dad held Mom's arm tightly, stopping her from getting closer or answering me. He looked down at me from the porch, taking a moment to think before he spoke. We've talked about it many times, Dad said, but we thought it was best for everyone if you didn't know. His tone was flat, almost like he was describing supply details, not expressing concern for his child in pain. You were happy without knowing. You were doing a great job at the company, so we didn't want to disturb that. The company? I asked, tilting my head in confusion. Yes, son, you are very important to us. We feared that if you found out, it would create chaos in the business in sales, production, delivery, and quality. Look at how upset you are now. I can see this will cause many problems, and we will lose our progress now. That's why we didn't tell you, Dad said, as if he was reading off a script. This time, Mom squeezed Dad's arm to stop him from continuing his speech about how I should just go along with everything. She noticed the look in my eyes, and my fists were tightening and loosening as he spoke. My voice dropped lower than ever before, sounding rough and firm. I took a deep breath and started. So let me get this straight. You didn't tell me about the person involved in the situation because you thought it would hurt the company. You all knew she wasn't having my baby, and you thought it was okay to let me believe otherwise. You let me raise someone else's child without saying anything just to keep things running smoothly at work. Robbie, my mom began. But my dad interrupted, holding her arm tightly. Yes, son. We thought it was for everyone's good, including yours, Dad said. Georgia told us the next one would be yours, not your brother's. At that moment, I felt a wave of anger toward my family. Instead, I took a breath. Everyone had let me down, all for the sake of keeping things on track for the company. Well, I feel really special now, I said with heavy sarcasm. I have such a caring family who kept me busy to hide the truth right in front of me. Dad didn't catch my tone, but Mom did. Robbie, she started again, but Dad interrupted her again. I'm glad you feel that way, son, Dad said, smiling as if I was starting to understand and accept everything. All of you can go away and deal with this yourselves. I'm done, I said, my expression flat. Yes, son, it's good you're seeing the situation clearly. We will sort it out. What? Dad said, finally processing my words. I said I'm done right now. I resign, and you can take your work plans and deal with them without me. I turned and walked toward the vehicle. Robbie. Mom tried to speak again. I turned back, giving them a sharp look. You both knew this whole time. Not only did you not say anything, but you didn't even try to stop it. You let it happen and treated me poorly without me ever knowing. You both should support me in tough times. Instead, it seems like you're just trying to fix things now. I realize that you are just as responsible as they are. But you know what? I paused, looking at their surprised faces. If everyone in this family thinks it's okay to treat me like this for the last 3 years just for the company, then you're right. Dad, you taught me better than this, and I will not accept it. So, I'm also leaving this family. I am no longer your son. I turned away and headed for my car, nearly slamming the door as I grabbed my bag from the back seat. I shut it hard and threw the keys to the company vehicle at their feet. They just stood there, watching. Take the vehicle. Don't call me, don't text me, don't reach out to me. Don't try to contact me at all. Make sure you tell the rest of the family the same thing. Don't expect me to be there for birthdays, Easter, or Christmas. And let your favorite son know that if he ever sees me walking toward him on the street, he should turn and walk the other way. My parents looked shocked. Get my severance pay ready, I said firmly. Make sure my bonus reflects all the extra work I've done, especially after fixing Brad's mistake while dealing with him. If it's not right, you will regret messing with me. I took my laptop out of my bag and set it down in front of them. Here's my work laptop. If it's damaged, take it out of my severance. I don't care if it still works. My parents stood there without saying anything as I pulled out my phone. Luckily, it was personal and not a work phone. I turned it on and ignored George's messages and missed calls. I ordered a ride. My mother finally found the courage to speak. Her voice was soft but sounded weak to me. I could see her nails digging into my dad's arm. His expression showed how upset he was about my laptop. Robbie, my mother said, I know this shouldn't have happened, but things will work out. We all love you. I grabbed my luggage and turned to walk away. I glanced back one last time at my mother. No, it won't be okay, Hattie, I said, using her name. None of you know what love really is. I loved and trusted my wife and family. Now I see I was naive to think my family would always support me. But you've shown me tonight that love and trust don't mean anything. You say you love me, but try saying that to the next person and see if they believe it after they talk to me. I said nothing more as I walked away, finding my ride at the end of the street as it began to rain. As I got into the car and looked out the window, I realized my parents didn't even try to follow me. Even after all the years I helped hold their business together, I felt like a big disappointment to them. I had the driver take me to what used to be my home. At least Brad and Georgia were gone. I started packing, throwing clothes and personal items into boxes. I loaded them into an old Toyota Camry I had bought for Georgia a few years back. We had planned to make some changes in a few months after the baby arrived, but I decided to keep the car. I had paid for it, and since Georgia wasn't having my baby, it felt right to keep it. Georgia could have Brad's baby, and I thought I was getting the better end of things. I had a few items left that wouldn't fit in the car, but I had everything I needed for the next few weeks. Before I left the house for good, I took down the large wedding portrait hanging in my old living room. It was a significant print that Georgia's parents had given us on our first anniversary. The photo from our wedding day showed Georgia and me at the center. To my left were my parents and my siblings, while to her right were Georgia's mother, stepfather, and her two sisters. We all looked so happy that day, bright smiles on our faces. I grabbed some pens from the kitchen and spent about 15 minutes marking up the portrait. I drew silly things like horns and mustaches on our faces. Then, I added a big belly to Georgia with an arrow pointing to it and wrote, "This happened because of him." I scribbled words like deceiver and betrayer above my family's heads, and put question marks over Georgia's family's heads. I wasn't sure if they knew what was going on. I had thought I had a good relationship with them, but I also knew Georgia didn't always get along with them. At one point, I considered going even further to ruin the picture, but I figured my message was clear enough. So, I hung the portrait back on the wall. I then sat at the kitchen table and wrote a note to Georgia. Georgia, by the time you read this letter, it will be clear that I have left the house. I have a lot of emotions right now, and I will try to keep my words respectful. This letter expresses some of the pain and sadness I feel. I believe you may have already gone to my former brother's parents' house, where you would see that I have cut ties with my entire family and left my job. I want nothing to do with any of you from now on. I came home tonight to surprise you and spend time together. I even called you while driving home, but you didn't notice because you were busy with my former brother. Seeing what happened between you both really hurt me deeply in a way I don't know if I can recover from. What hurt the most is that the baby you are carrying isn't mine. It's his. You all planned to pass it off as my child. Georgia, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. It's clear that a divorce is the only way forward for us. I can never forget, and I can't forgive, what you and my old family did to me. I've taken most of my things from the house, and will find a time to get the rest soon. The rental agreement lasts for 6 more months, and my family's company pays for it so you can use it. I won't be here anymore. I understand that the divorce splits our money and belongings, which feels unfair to me since I was hurt the most. But I will accept it if it means you're out of my life. I've asked my old parents not to contact me, and I'll ask the same of you. Right now, I feel more anger towards you than I ever felt love. But think of it this way. You can now be open about being with Brad Jr. and raising your child without me finding out. If I keep writing, this will turn into an angry speech, so let me just say this. I wish you all the worst, Georgia. Have a life full of regret. Your soon-to-be ex-husband, Robert Other. I know I said I would try not to use bad words, but I wrote it by hand, so I feel like I did okay until the end. I folded the letter and placed my wedding ring on top of it before leaving the house. Georgia would return the next day. I heard that loud cries could be heard from 2 houses away, so much so that the police were called. When they saw my artwork, it was clear what had happened. They left without taking any action, but I'm sure there was some talk at the station. I called my Muay Thai trainer, Darren Bray. He had become a friend over the years, and he and his girlfriend, Tony, had joined Georgia and me at several barbecues. Right then, he was the only one I could think of who wouldn't spill to my family. Darren was happy to let me stay in their spare room for a while. Once they sat me down on their couch and explained why, Darren and Tony treated me like a long-lost puppy coming home. Over the next few weeks, I started to manage some of my feelings. First, I found a lawyer for my divorce. Then, I showed my lawyer the video I had taken, and his eyes went wide as he watched it. I told him I wanted to end things with Georgia as quickly as possible, and he agreed. Lastly, I found a human resources specialist to ensure I got all my pay from Total Build. Since Darren was my martial arts trainer, we trained together often. He helped me channel my anger in the ring. However, he had to stop me a few times when my anger got too strong during fights, and my opponents didn't realize they were in for a tough match. Though he was almost 5 years older than me, Darren became my best friend during that time. He listened to me without judgment and took me out several times. We had fun at bars along the beautiful Gold Coast beaches, and he even hugged me when I needed support. Tony took care of me like a caring mother. She made me big, home-cooked meals, always asked about my day, and looked after me while I dealt with my sadness. A few weeks after a tough meeting, Darren and Tony helped me use their truck to pick up the rest of my things from my old place. My lawyer set up a time when no one would be there. I got a couple of chairs, my desk, and my training gear. When we arrived, not much had changed in the house, but I noticed that a wedding picture was missing. I found it in the spare bedroom wardrobe. There was a letter on the table with Georgia's handwriting, but I threw it away without reading it, so she would see it gone when she returned. After about 6 weeks, I received my payment from Total Build, including my last paycheck and bonus. Together with my half of the savings, it was a good amount. My family tried to stop me from getting the money, saying that I had quit my job and was trying to get extra. I took it to Fair Work Australia, and they quickly backed off. With this money, I wouldn't need to work for almost a year, maybe longer, depending on my living plans. Next, my lawyer received requests from Georgia's lawyer about 4 months later, asking against the divorce. Georgia wanted counseling and to work things out. I told her no. She claimed she just wanted to talk because I had misunderstood things I heard. Finally, I told my lawyer to send a video to her lawyer. After that, the requests stopped. By the time it was nearly 7 months into the divorce, I hadn't heard from Georgia or my family in a while. I was feeling a bit better, like maybe life would treat me well again. I was looking for a job and a place to live. Thanks to Darren, I had made some money from a few semi-professional fights. But I knew I needed more to get by. Darren and Tony had helped me a lot, but it was time for me to stand on my own. It was Friday morning around 10. I had slept in after a late-night workout. After showering and getting dressed in casual shorts and a t-shirt, I was heading down the stairs of Darren and Tony's 2-story house when the doorbell rang. "All right, him coming?" I called out jokingly. I heard Tony laugh as I opened the door, expecting a delivery person or something similar. To my surprise, my sister Joanna stood there, looking impatient. Behind her, looking shy, was Georgia's little sister Amy. I quickly closed the door in Joanna's face. "Nope," I said, shaking my head as I walked away. "Robbie, that was rude." Tony chimed in, coming into the room and drying her hands on a tea towel. When she saw my expression, she paused and glanced at the door as the knocking continued. Both of us could hear Joanna shouting for me to open the door. I pointed toward the front door. "It's my sister and Georgia's." Tony's expression changed, then she looked a bit upset. She understood how I felt about my family. "Do you want me to send them away?" I nodded. "Would you? I really don't want to talk to them, especially Joanna." Tony walked over and opened the door, but before she could say anything, Joanna rushed in, pushing Tony aside, and started shouting at me. "You are a terrible brother, Robbie. Do you know that? What makes you think your life is so important that you can just leave everyone behind?" Her eyes were filled with anger, as if she had been holding it in for a long time, but the anger seemed misplaced. I looked back at my sister with a serious expression. This woman had discovered that her older brother had been upset by my wife's actions for a long time. But she was not angry about that. She was upset because I wasn't making things easy for her anymore. I took a deep breath to stay calm and not say what I really wanted to say. "Joanna," I said quietly but firmly, "I am going to ask you nicely. Please leave." She scoffed at me, mistaking my calmness for weakness. She had always tried to push me around when we were kids, thinking she could get her way by being loud. "Do you even know how your leaving has hurt Georgia? She was so upset that she almost lost the baby, and where were you?" "Hiding here," Joanna shouted, pointing to the house. "You know she had to have the baby, your baby, all alone," Joanna said, looking for a reaction. I stayed silent, so she continued. I think she wanted to lash out so much that she missed how I felt when she mentioned the baby. Amy stood outside, watching quietly. Tony leaned against the door frame, but Joanna just wanted to let it all out at me. "You," she poked my chest with her finger, "left us all to deal with everything. Mom and Dad are angry and losing business because of you. We're all picking up the pieces." She pretended to speak in a silly voice, making air quotes. "All because your feelings got hurt." Then she balled her fists and acted like she was crying like a child. "Oh, Robbie, grow up and stop feeling sorry for yourself. You have a child to care for and a business to help bring back to life." For the first time, I felt a strong urge to react, but I didn't. The anger that had been building since she walked in was clear, because Joanna suddenly stepped back, looking unsure. Like, with Mom and Dad, my voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. "You really think I have time for someone who betrays me? My own brother and her in my home laughing at me? Or how about when I walked in and heard them say that the child they claim I should care for isn't mine, but his?" I heard a gasp and turned to see Amy standing outside the door, hands covering her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Robbie, I'm so sorry." "I didn't know," Amy said, sinking to her knees and looking at me. I glared at my older sister and pointed at Amy, realizing not everyone understood the situation. "And look at you. You couldn't just come here and leave my life alone. Now, you're dragging more innocent people into your lies." I gestured to Amy, who was sobbing in the doorway. "I bet you told her I had a fight with her sister. My divorce was baseless, so you both had to come over and try to set me straight, did you?" For a moment, Joanna was silent. Then she looked at Tony, who was watching everything from the doorway. Finally, Joanna took a breath and spoke up. "So what if I did? You think it took you long to find someone else to be with?" My sister shot back, mirroring my anger. "Joanna," I warned her, "I'm giving you a chance. Do not disrespect people in this house who you don't understand." "So what? Your wife was with your older brother for 3 years. You're upset about it now. Just get over it. You don't have to find someone else and run away from your problems." I realized Joanna was just as confused as the rest of my family. I glanced at Tony, who was surprisingly smiling, arms crossed over her chest. "First of all," Tony said, as she walked toward Amy, who had slumped by the front door, "Robbie and I are not involved like that." Then, while Joanna and I watched, Tony gently helped Amy to her feet and spoke softly to her, ignoring Joanna. "Come on. Let's get you inside where you can sit down." Tony helped Amy onto the couch. "Second," she said, turning back to Joanna, "my boyfriend Darren is your brother's mentor. Both Darren and I have been helping Robbie after everything you all did to him." She paused, but Joanna didn't seem to take it in while she helped Amy settle in. Tony faced Joanna again. "And lastly, I've heard everything your family and his ex-wife put Robbie through. I think stepping away from you all is one of the more peaceful choices he could make. I think your time here is over. There's the door. Don't let it hit you on your way out." Joanna looked at me, her jaw clenched. "Robbie, please come back," she said, her voice almost pleading as she ignored Tony's comment. "The production is struggling. Sales are dropping. The team isn't working well. We really need you." "Well, that's too bad, Joe," I replied. "You can't stroll in here acting like this is all my fault and then try to make me feel guilty. That's not happening. Did anyone take action about Brad and Georgia when they should have? Tell me, does he still work there? Or did Dad tell him to calm down? Because I would just forgive everyone and return." Joanna looked down at her shoes. "Dad gave both of them a talking to. Brad has to run his sales through Dad now. He won't get any bonuses for the rest of the year." "Please, Robbie," she said, her tone shifting from pleading to desperate. "You need to come back. We are in a tough spot without you." "No, Joanna," I said firmly. "There are plenty of reasons why I won't, but two stand out." She looked at me, waiting. "First," I said, raising a finger, "my former brother is still there. After everything that happened, you would think you all would let him go if you wanted any chance to make things right with me or save the business. I'm sure that Total Build would fail if he stays." "But Robbie," Joanna said, "Brad is going to lead the company one day as the oldest. Mom and Dad can't just get rid of him." I laughed. "That's the worst excuse I've ever heard for keeping someone around, especially promoting someone who isn't capable. I can't understand that way of thinking," I replied. "While they're struggling without me, making him in charge would ruin the company in no time. Saying he can't go because he's the oldest is simply not true, and you all should see that." Joanna couldn't argue with that, but she shrugged her shoulders like she didn't care. "What's the second reason?" she asked, almost hesitantly. "Simple," I said, raising a second finger. "Not once in this situation has anyone shown any regret." She gulped, and I continued. "From the moment I walked into the house after returning from Melbourne and saw how everyone was acting, everyone expected me to just accept things. People made excuses and tried to justify their actions, telling me to get over it. But no one bothered to ask how I felt or even said they were sorry." "That's not right, Robbie. Both Georgia and Mom told me they apologized." Again, with the excuses. My wife said sorry just to divert my attention. She's sorry she got caught, not for what she did. Mom said it without any feeling, then practically told me to get over it. I'm sorry, Joanna. Saying sorry is more than just the words. It's about the actions and feelings behind them. You're upset because I'm not taking care of things for everyone at Total Build, not because you feel bad about Brad and Georgia having a child together in my bed. Joanna's anger rose again. You know what, Robbie? You're right. I don't care about your hurt feelings. Should Brad and Georgia have done what they did? No. Should we have kept you in the dark? Absolutely. Then she changed her tone, saying, You were happy before all this, but you messed everything up by coming home early. Okay, let me think, I said, pretending to ponder something important. I came home early because I was good at my job and wanted to show love to who I thought was a faithful partner. So I'm the bad guy? I asked, feeling both angry and confused. Yes! Joanna shouted, throwing her hands up. If you had just stuck to your plans, this wouldn't be a mess. Right. So I should just have been oblivious raising another man's child with a wife who doesn't care about me except for what I can provide? I replied. It seemed like Joanna couldn't see how I was the one being wronged. I sighed and raised my hand to stop her response. Look, Joanna, this isn't going to work. None of you feel regret. You're all still blaming me even though you're the ones who messed up. I waited, then said, I've asked you to leave. Tony has asked you to go. Should we call the police to help you leave? For a moment she tried to argue, but then headed for the door, saying, Come on, Amy. This is a waste of time. Robbie is too caught up in his own feelings to understand. Amy looked at me and said, Actually, Joanna, I want to stay and talk to Robbie. Is that okay with you, Robbie? I shrugged. Sure, Amy. I turned to my sister. As Tony said, there's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out. Joanna glared at me, then glanced at Amy and finally at Tony. She huffed and walked out, slamming the door behind her with a loud bang. A minute later, we heard her car start, and then she sped off down the street. I knew she'd call the family to complain about me. I took a seat on the other couch facing Amy, who was looking at me with tears in her eyes. Hey, Robbie, Tony said. Although this wasn't exactly fun, I'm all set here. Are you two going to be okay if I leave you to talk? Yeah, Tony. Thanks for stepping in. I appreciate it, I replied. Anytime. Darren should be back around 7 tonight. Thai food sounds good, right? I chuckled. No problem. See you both tonight. Tony grabbed her bag and walked out the front door, closing it softly, unlike the first person. I turned to Amy and she looked back at me. So, an ambush, huh? I said in a lighter tone to Georgia's little sister. Amy blushed. Sorry, Robbie. I was in the States when all this happened. When I came back last month, it was to both families in chaos. What did they tell you? I asked softly. Amy paused to think. They mostly said that you and Georgia had a big fight that brought your parents into it. They said you were being difficult and needed to be talked to understand and come home. I snorted. But Robbie, Amy said, worry in her eyes. I had no idea that Georgia had been with your brother for so long. I found out that night after 3 years, I replied. Amy nodded sadly, now understanding why I had walked away from everyone. And is it true that it's not your baby? She asked with curiosity and concern. I'm almost sure. I overheard them talking when I came back early from a trip. I found them in my bed. And it was shocking, I said, remembering the painful moment. I sighed again, recalling the terrible scene. I think we will need a paternity test. That's tricky since he is my brother. I looked at Amy. Are you okay with me talking like this? Amy nodded. It's all right, Robbie. I understand. Coming home to your wife with another man must be so hard. And to find out it was your brother for all that time, you're handling this better than I would have lost it. We sat in silence for a moment. And what about Joanna, your parents? Amy asked. You mentioned arguing that they knew something about all this. Sorry, I was confused when that lady helped me to the couch. Tony is my Muay Thai mentor's girlfriend. They've been good friends helping me out lately. Darren gets me to the ring and helps me fight to let out some anger. Tony helps me around the house so I don't drown in my sadness. I looked away. And yes, my family knew everything almost right from the start and kept it from me. Why would they do that? Amy sounded shocked. For their own benefit, apparently, I shrugged. Just for that? She asked, not believing it. Yep. That's what I was told. They thought I was better off not knowing. They were surprised I got so upset when I found out. Mom, Dad, and Joanna all told me to move on. The company matters more. I stopped speaking. We sat quietly for a moment. Amy was thinking it over. She sighed, stood up, and walked over to me, sitting on the same couch. "I'm sorry, Robbie," she said, placing her hand on my arm in a comforting way. "Amy, what are you sorry for?" I replied. "You didn't do anything wrong, and it seems like they tried to confuse you as well, so you don't need to feel bad. I'm sorry for what you're dealing with. It's not your fault." She paused. "I'm also sorry I'm related to someone who has hurt one of the best people I know." She turned red, and I chuckled a bit at her comment. "Thanks, Amy. It helps to know someone understands." "So what are you up to today?" Amy asked, changing the subject and sounding more cheerful. "Not much. I've mostly just been training and relaxing." "Why do you ask?" She smiled. "How would you feel if I took you out for lunch to help you feel better?" She put her hand on my arm gently. It didn't seem intentional, but it felt nice. "Sure. Let me get ready. Give me 5 minutes." Her smile brightened the room. Amy took me to lunch. We talked about various things. I wasn't working at the moment, and Amy seemed hesitant to discuss her job, only mentioning that she traveled a lot. While we talked, the waiter brought our food. I had chicken parmigiana with fries and a Coke, while she had a Caesar salad with chicken. We chatted more about Georgia and my family. She asked about my plans. "Well, I'm almost divorced from your sister, which is probably why Joanna chose today to visit me. I think this morning was her last try to get me to change my mind, stop the divorce, and return to total build." We shared a look and smiled, but we both knew that wouldn't happen. On a positive note, I'm thinking of buying a house. So, I guess finding a job is next after the divorce, I said. Amy nodded. "What about your family? Will you talk to them and make peace?" I glared at her. Amy quickly leaned back. "Is it that bad? If I never speak to one of them again, that would be just fine," I said, then looked at Amy. "Was there another reason you came with Joanna this morning?" She raised her hands in a peaceful gesture, then sighed. "When Georgia cried to Mom and Dad about how you had left her, it really upset me. The Robbie I know wouldn't do what Georgia claimed. You really upset me, Robbie." I raised an eyebrow, understanding her feelings, but I knew there was more to this story. Amy sighed and glanced at me briefly over her salad. "You might not realize it, but I have liked you for a long time." She blushed as she spoke. "When Georgia first brought you home, you were nice to Mom and Dad. You even spent time with me. As you began dating her, I saw how considerate you were, always thinking about her happiness. You even remembered my birthday and got me gifts. Not many brothers-in-law do that." I shrugged. "I'm good at planning, Amy. Paying attention to detail helps me do well at my job. And being nice to my girlfriend's little sister helped me get on well with your family back then." "I know, Robbie. And that's the point," Amy said. "You were great as my brother-in-law. It didn't make sense when I heard how you walked away from Georgia and left her so upset. So, when I got the chance to come here with Joanna to talk to you, I took it." She looked at me seriously. "If you left her just because of a fight, I would have lost faith in all men and relationships." "I mean that much to you?" I asked, surprised. Amy nodded. "Robbie, what Georgia and your family did to you is terrible," she said, looking out the cafe window. "They hid their oldest son having a secret relationship with the wife of their youngest son. Then, when you found out and confronted them, they claimed it was for some benefit. If I were you, I wouldn't have just walked away. I would have moved far away and started fresh." I smiled. "Don't think I haven't thought of that more than once. I just need to save some money first. I wanted to take some time, find a new job, and then start anew." We fell into a comfortable silence. I finished my food, wiping my plate clean. I knew Amy wanted to say something, so I waited. She took a deep breath, looking a bit nervous. "Robbie," she said, her eyes shining, "if I asked you, would you run away with me?" "Amy, even if things didn't work out, my ex-wife is still your sister," I said with a chuckle. "Half-sister," Amy giggled. "Even with that, you're not married to her anymore, and there's nothing wrong with asking." I nodded. "That's true." "Great," she said, smiling. "Then you can run away with me." I laughed, then noticed that her smile had a serious undertone. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Absolutely," Amy replied, smiling warmly. "Amy, I can't do that." "Why not?" she asked. "Well, for starters, I don't have enough money to just leave everything behind," I explained. She nodded, her smile still bright. "And also, I'm still married," I added, looking at the attractive woman across from me. "Even if it's just for a little while longer, I should handle the situation with Georgia." Again, she nodded, still smiling, as if she understood something important. "And finally, Amy, you're Georgia's sister," I pointed out. "Wouldn't it be strange if I just ran away with you?" She smiled again. "All valid points, Robbie, but remember, Georgia and I are only half-sisters," she reminded me, repeating herself yet again. "Right," I said. "Georgia and her sister Ruth shared the same father. After Georgia was born, their father, Steve, left their family for another woman. Their mother, Rain, later married Peter Brown, and that's when Amy was born. I had always thought Peter and Rain seemed happy together. I suppose Georgia took after her father in the way she acted." "Exactly," Amy said. "Because from now on, I want nothing to do with that troublemaker. The less connection I have to her, the better." I nodded, glad she understood my thoughts. "Now about your previous questions," Amy said, her eyes sparkling. "What if money and legal help could be arranged to solve both problems?" She still had that determined glint in her eyes that made me realize she was serious. "Amy?" I hesitated. "Are you really saying you think you can make everything go away? If you can, I would consider it." "I am serious, Robbie. I know I can find the resources we need. But I want you to come with me." "Why?" I asked, curious. "Because, Robbie, if you are free, I want to see if there might be something between us. I believe I can be everything my sister isn't," she said, looking at me earnestly. "And if it doesn't work out, at least I'll know I helped someone I care about escape a tough situation." "Can I think about it?" I asked. She laughed lightly. "Of course. The offer stands whenever you want. Just call me. But I'm only visiting my parents for another week before I head back home and then go overseas. I would love for you to join me," she said, raising her eyebrows with hope. The rest of lunch passed quickly. I could tell Amy felt she had surprised me by the way I kept glancing at her, but she kept the conversation light and casual. We took a ride back to Darren and Tony's place, and before she left to see her parents, she gave me a warm hug. I could sense she wanted more, but wasn't pushing it. In that hug, while she felt a bit like Georgia, there was a warmth that felt different. It felt like her energy was trying to connect with mine instead of just taking from it, which was how I often felt when Georgia and I hugged. That evening, I had dinner with Darren and Tony. We started by sharing the story about Joanna's visit, and then I talked about my lunch with Amy and her unusual offer. "Do you think she really means it? Could she actually do that?" Darren asked after I explained what Amy had said. "I'm not sure," I replied. "None of us really knows what she does. All we know is that a couple of years ago, she got a job that requires a lot of traveling. She lives a few hours away on the Sunshine Coast and visits family every few months. If she can manage that, then I think she might help me move at least. I'm not certain about the legal stuff, but she says she wants a chance with me since I'm not getting back together with Georgia. Tony laughed softly. That girl really likes you. Darren and I looked at her. How do you know? Darren asked Tony. Because when this handsome guy here, Tony said, gesturing towards me, told her why he left, she didn't cry about her sister. She dropped to the floor, holding her heart, with her eyes on Robbie the whole time. She shrugged. She's had feelings for you for a while. I nodded. She hinted at it during lunch. I always thought she was cute, but I was married to her sister. But if her offer is serious, I still have to think about the fact that she is Georgia's sister. I'm not sure I'm ready for a new relationship right now. I wouldn't want her to be a rebound. Tony laughed again. Robbie, how long have we known each other? Maybe about 9 years, I replied. Long enough, Tony said. So, Mr. Smart Guy, let me tell you, she isn't just a rebound. Sure, you're hurting, but something tells me you care about her. She won't let you go easily. While I would hate to see you leave us here, I think you should take the chance. We turned to Darren for his opinion. He took a sip of his beer, glanced at the leftover food, and looked back at me. I think I've met her a couple of times. She's shorter than Georgia, has really dark hair, and looks different from her sister. I laughed, and Tony playfully nudged him. I kind of agree with Tony. She really likes you. Honestly, though, even if it doesn't work out, you've got nothing holding you here, no job or family. You might not get an opportunity like this again. In with Tony, go for it with Amy. We talked for a few more hours. I still hadn't made up my mind, but I was leaning toward yes. The turning point came 2 days later when I was walking through the Gold Coast Mall to update my driver's license and passed by a cafe. My whole family in Georgia were sitting together with a small stroller next to her and a tiny baby in her arms. My parents were cooing over the baby. Joanna had a big smile, and Brad Jr. was holding my soon-to-be ex-wife's hand, acting silly. None of them seemed bothered about how they had treated me. I watched them for about 2 minutes until my mother noticed me. When I saw her looking, I snapped out of my daze and started walking away quickly. I had almost gone 2 blocks when she caught up with me. "Robbie!" I heard my mother shout. "Robbie, wait, please! Sweetie, stop!" she said as she hurried after me. I thought about walking faster or going into a store to escape her, but I knew that would just make her chase me longer. So, I paused, took out my phone, and called Amy. Amy answered right away as I turned to face my mother, phone pressed to my ear. "All right, gorgeous," I said. "Let's go for it." Amy chuckled at my tone. "Sure thing, handsome. But I sense there's someone around who shouldn't know it's me, right?" "Yeah," I replied. She laughed again. "Okay. I'll pick you up at 7 tonight, then you can fill me in." I smiled slightly while looking at my mother, but she knew the smile wasn't meant for her. "See you then." I hung up. I dropped my smile and looked straight at my mother. "What do you want, Hattie?" I said flatly, using her name. "Robbie, please," she said softly. "This isn't fair. You can't do this to us. You can't just cut us off. We need you." "Fair," I replied, my anger bubbling up. "I've told you what isn't fair, having my family lie to me for years while covering for the person who caused all this, pretending it was my fault. Does that seem fair to you?" "But Robbie, it's not the same. We really need you," she insisted. "Like you truly need me," I said sharply. "What you really want is someone to manage your company. You want someone to fix the messes your older son makes. You want an obedient worker, not a son you care about. You want someone to keep the profits coming in. That's not true." My mother paused, searching for words but struggling to find them. She shifted her approach. "Robbie, you know we all love you. It was the first time I heard her say that since everything fell apart. I laughed bitterly. You all love me? Really? You say you love me? I let my laughter fade to a low growl. Then explain how tricking me about my life is love. Tell me, Hattie, I said sharply. Mum stood there looking down at the ground, not knowing how to respond. People were moving around us, a few glancing our way. But it was just another scene happening on the streets of the Gold Coast as everyone went about their day. Because not telling you was meant to protect you, my father said, joining my mother. A little farther down the street, moving cautiously behind him, were Joanna, with Georgia pushing the stroller and, of course, my brother. We've talked about this before, Dad, I said, using his name. It wasn't protecting me. It just created a debt of pain and dishonesty, and I'm the only one who seems to be feeling it. That's not true, Robbie, Joanna replied. The sharp tone from the other day was gone. We all felt bad keeping this from you, but now you act like we're the bad ones. We're hurt too. I looked at my sister. Hurt? Come on, Joanna. The other day you barged into Darren and Tony's place yelling at me and blaming me for not forgiving the person who hurt me, I said, directing my glare at Georgia, who took a step back. And the one who caused so much trouble, I said, turning to my brother. You all have no idea what it really means to suffer. You think you're having a hard time because I won't clean up after you. You think it's tough because your work isn't going well. You think you're struggling because things are messy. I saw you all just a little while ago. None of you understands the pain of being lied to and hurt and then being told to just get over it. Well, thanks a lot. I'm the one in a terrible place because of all of you, and none of you care about how I feel. Son, you never gave us, my father started. A chance? I cut him off. He paused, looking at me. You were going to say I never gave you a chance to apologize or to tell me you understand how I feel. You wanted a chance to ask for forgiveness for what you did to me. Is that what you meant, Dad? He gave me a hard look. No, son. I was going to say, you never gave us a chance to explain, my father said. Explain? I responded, glaring at him as the rest of the family watched. Oh, you explained everything just fine. I must be adopted because it's crazy to think anyone would believe the nonsense you're trying to sell. Does the person who hurt me or my brother regret what they did? I looked around, and no one could meet my gaze for a moment. Didn't think so? I said. Brad Jr. stepped forward, suddenly changing his frown to a grin. Robbie, you need to move on. Georgia and I have a wonderful baby boy now. If you can just say sorry and come back to work, we'd love for you to be the child's godfather. I know it's not the same as it being your own, but he didn't finish his sentence. I've mentioned before that I practice a few different martial arts. I take part in several tournaments against fighters who compete at a national level, and I usually win most of them. However, we don't have the same financial backing for professionals in Australia as they do in the US, so I only make a little pocket money from my fights. Some of these fighters are really good, and I can hold my own against them. So my brother never really had a chance against me. After I landed a strong kick, my brother, Brad Jr., was sent flying from the sidewalk and crashed into a wall nearby. I was the only one who saw what happened, and my older brother was left lying there unconscious. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. But soon after, people started yelling at me. People were shouting from all sides as I saw a couple of police officers rushing toward us. They quickly noticed the situation and decided to arrest me. While they were putting handcuffs on me, my mother, who was crying next to my brother, looked up at me and asked why. I couldn't help but smile as I made sure everyone could hear me. I told my brother never to come near me again after I learned about what He did to my wife, I said. I warned him that if he got close, I would take him down. He thought he could keep treating me badly after everything that happened. I just kept my word. I glanced at the crowd, especially at my mother, who looked at me with sadness. But I did what I said I would do. I turned to the officers. They were trying to stay serious, but I could see a hint of understanding in their eyes. I raised my hands, now in cuffs. "Take me away, officers." They calmly led me to a police car and drove me a few blocks to the station. Once we were off the street, they apologized for arresting me. It was just their job. I let them know I understood and that I was prepared for the charges, but I wouldn't stand for any judgment from my family, especially from my brother. While I was being processed at the station, they allowed me to make a phone call with them listening in. I tried calling Amy, but it went to voicemail. I left a message saying I had been arrested and asked her to help since I didn't trust my family. After hanging up, I smiled and thanked the officer for letting me use my phone. They took my personal belongings and logged them with the rest of my things. I was placed in an interview room where they offered me a drink and some biscuits. News had apparently spread through the station quickly about what had happened between me and Brad. Although the officers were bound by law and procedure, there didn't seem to be much sympathy for him. After sitting there for about an hour, an officer informed me that I had a visitor. I expected to see my lawyer or maybe Amy, but to my surprise, it was Georgia. "Hi, Robbie," she said softly as she sat down across from me. I didn't respond, simply looking her over for a moment. She still carried some weight from the pregnancy, and I could see traces of the person I had once loved. Despite everything, she still had that same beauty, though now it felt more like a distant memory than something real. "So what do you want, Georgia?" I asked, my tone cold. "Haven't you done enough already?" "Robbie," she began, then hesitated, looking down at the table, her shoulders drooping. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for everything we put you through. You didn't deserve any of it." She paused, glancing up at me with a mix of sadness and regret. "I never should have—" She trailed off. Then her expression changed to one of frustration. "But that doesn't excuse what you did to Brad today," she said, her voice tense. We stared at each other for a moment before I let out a bitter laugh. "You almost gave me an apology there, Georgia. But then you turned it around. Let's look at it from my side for a moment. Do you have any idea how angry and hurt I've felt these past few months? The betrayal I felt not just from you, but from everyone around me?" She nodded slightly, unsure of what to say. "Georgia, I'm not sure you really understand," I continued. "This afternoon, when I saw you all sitting there together at the cafe, laughing and acting like everything was fine, I didn't feel any love or loyalty from anyone. Not a single person even seemed to care about what I was going through." "That's not true," she replied, her voice softer. "We were all heartbroken when you walked away. We understand that you're hurt and angry, but they're still your family, Robbie, and I still love you." "Really?" I asked, unable to hide my disbelief. "In your mind, you still believe that, don't you?" She nodded again, and I sighed, feeling the weight of it all. "Well, let me give you a glimpse of what that love looked like from my side. The night I caught you both in our home, realizing the truth about the child you led me to believe was mine, it shattered everything. And hearing your words, the things you both said about me, broke whatever was left of my trust." Silence filled the room as the weight of our shared pain settled over us. I drove around for a while, trying to find comfort in a place I thought would be safe. I expected others to feel as hurt and upset as I was about the betrayal by you and Brad. But when I got there, I found my parents knew about my older brother being with you behind my back. They even knew that the child wasn't mine. They had the nerve to say they didn't tell me because it might hurt their business and that I was better off not knowing. So, where is the love in all that? I asked. I could imagine that if the police were watching, they would be taking notes. She tried to respond several times but couldn't find the words. We fell into a heavy silence for a few minutes, both unsure of what to say. "What do we do now, Robbie?" she asked softly. "Nothing," I snapped. "We do nothing. Take our separate paths. Finish the divorce. Maybe someday I'll find someone who values me enough to be faithful." She looked at me, tears filling her eyes. "Robbie, you know I love you, right? It was only ever physical with Brad. Please believe that." I gave a dry laugh. "It's interesting how when someone gets caught being unfaithful, they say it was just a fling. Do you understand how hurtful that is?" "But it's true," she insisted. "It was always about the physical side with him. I would leave him for you in an instant. I'm sorry about the child not being yours. But maybe the next one will be. I promise." I raised my hand and slapped my own face. Georgia looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Sorry," I said, forcing a grin. "I just needed to check if I was dreaming after hearing that. You think I would ever trust you again after what you did?" She flinched as I continued. "To answer your question, it's incredibly hurtful to the person being cheated on. For me, being intimate is about giving myself completely to the person I love, making them feel like they are the most important person to me. There's no way I could be with someone else. So telling me it was just physical with my brother while having his child, and then claiming you love me, is not just insulting, it's hypocritical." She was crying now. I went on, letting my frustration show as I spoke. "Georgia, you might believe you love me, but I don't see it that way. If you truly loved me, you would never have been with Brad. You wouldn't have been with him for so long and had a child. If you loved me, you wouldn't have needed my family to hide the truth for you. If you truly cared for me, you would have come to me the moment my older brother asked for forgiveness. But I don't think you really love me. You say you're sorry, but I feel like you're just upset about being caught. It hurts, but it's not because of what you did to me. I think if you could, you would do it again. So just go, Georgia. Go back to Brad and your old life. Make a new life for yourself, and forget about me, because I plan to move on and forget all of you." I noticed the door open suddenly. An officer stepped in, guiding Amy behind her. Amy looked at me, then at the upset Georgia, who was holding back tears. "Georgia," I said, a small smile appearing as I looked at Amy and then back at Georgia, who was crying. "It's time for you to leave. Go back to your life and let me go. If you don't, I might ruin my family and everything they care about because of the happiness I lost because of you." Georgia looked up at me, concerned. "You wouldn't?" She seemed scared that I might actually do something like that. I nodded. "You saw how I reacted to Brad. If you and my old family don't leave me alone, then it's only a matter of time before I go after you all. They are struggling now, losing clients because I'm not there. They have to work hard again, which they've forgotten how to do. So please, don't make me come after you all. Just leave me in peace." I pointed to the door, and after a moment Georgia slowly walked out, only to bump into Amy. "Amy, how did you know I was here?" "Thank you for being here. Everything has gone wrong," Georgia said as she reached out to hug her sister. Amy shot back at her. "I'm not here for you and I won't be again. This mess is yours to fix." "What are you doing here then?" Georgia asked, looking from Amy back to me. I smiled. This is my one phone call, I told Georgia. I couldn't call anyone else in my family. I don't trust them. But I had lunch with Amy the other day, and she made me feel like I could rely on her. Georgia suddenly yelled at Amy, trying to hit her. Amy grabbed Georgia's wrist, just as the officer stepped in to break it up. "You little troublemaker," Georgia shouted. "Just because he doesn't want me doesn't mean you can come in and take him for yourself." Amy laughed and let go of Georgia, while the officer held on to her. "I haven't taken him yet," Amy said playfully. "But just wait. He will forget all about you." I couldn't help but smile at Amy's words. Suddenly she looked more appealing to me. She was stepping into my life, and when she caught my gaze, she seemed to know it. Here was a woman who had cared for me for a long time. She respected that I was with someone else before, but now that I was free, she was ready to show that she wanted me to be with her. It felt like Amy would stand up for me against anyone if she had to. She laughed when she saw the expressions on Georgia's and my faces. Then, she walked around her sister and entered the room without saying anything else. She handed me my phone, wallet, and jacket. "You're free to go. No charges, but you will need to cover Brad Jr.'s hospital bills. He has a mild concussion, bruised ribs, and a sprained neck," the officer said. "Totally worth it," I replied with a smirk. I took my phone from Amy while Georgia watched us, her anger silent. I hugged Amy, but she surprised us all by pulling me in for a heartfelt kiss. In that moment, I forgot about Georgia entirely. The officer had to hold Georgia back again as we left. We passed my mother, who was waiting for Georgia. I didn't say anything or even look at her, even though I could feel her presence. That spoke volumes to her. We quickly left the station and caught a ride back to Darren and Tony's place. I wanted another kiss, but Amy laughed and said we would have to wait. "When you really become my man, you won't want anyone else," she teased. For a few moments, I stood in front of some boxes. My room didn't have much to pack, but I needed to sort it out. It had been less than a week since I decided to run away with Amy, my ex-wife's younger sister. No matter how things turned out, I was ready to stop feeling sorry for myself and get my life back together. I still hadn't figured out what job I would do since I left the family business, Total Build. The few fights Darren helped me with earned some money, but not enough for a steady living. Amy told me not to worry about money or work. We would figure it out together. Speaking of Amy, our relationship was growing fast, and it felt a little strange. We weren't officially dating, but it felt like we were. Knowing Amy for years made it less about getting to know each other and more about deepening our friendship. I had a feeling that, like me, Amy knew it wouldn't be long before we made things official. It was a hectic time. When I wasn't training or hanging out with Darren, Tony, and Amy, I was getting ready to move. Honestly, once I figured out what to pack, or what was in storage from my breakup with Georgia, Amy took care of everything else. She arranged the movers, the finances, and even some legal stuff for my divorce. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said she enjoyed helping me escape with her. Amy worked odd hours during the day and had a couple of evening shifts. Amy didn't share much about her job, but she mentioned that her unusual hours were due to calls for work from around the world. Most of the time, Amy worked from a hotel room here on the Gold Coast. When she wasn't working, we enjoyed spending time together. When we could, Amy and I went out for lunch or dinner. I loved that she was often by my side when she wasn't busy. She came to see me train with Darren and even watched one of my Saturday fights against another local. The fight ended in a draw. Still, from how Amy talked about the match afterward, you would have thought I had won easily. In those early weeks, I wanted to repeat the kiss we shared at the police station many times. I knew we both felt the same way because we often had to stop ourselves from getting too close. We talked about taking things slow. We both understood our relationship was special, but we wanted to make sure I was ready before moving forward. The day before my big move, Amy helped me gather everything I had at Darren and Tony's place. This included my belongings already in storage, which we packed into a large storage unit. Her movers would pick everything up in a few weeks and take it to her place. All I needed to keep out were the essentials: a few outfits, my new laptop, and my training gear. The night before the move, Amy and I spent time at Darren and Tony's. We all had a great evening enjoying Thai food together. During dinner, we chatted about all kinds of topics, like old friends do. Amy held my hand through it all and gave me knowing looks. After a couple of bottles of wine, we played some fun games, including an indie game called Throw Burrito that turned out to be a hit. As the night wrapped up, I was surprised when Amy didn't leave as she usually did. Instead, she followed me into the guest room I was staying in and slipped under the covers after skillfully changing into her pajamas without showing me anything. I raised my eyebrows in surprise, and she giggled as it was my turn to change into my own comfortable clothes before sliding into bed beside her with open arms. She nestled against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "It's okay, Robbie. I really want to, but I promise I won't rush things tonight," Amy said softly. "But tomorrow we're starting a new adventure together, and I can't wait for us to be close like this all the time." She settled in next to me, and I could feel her warmth against my side. My heart raced as she wrapped her arms around me and kissed me for the second time in all the years we had known each other. As I closed my eyes, I felt the softness of her lips against mine. The way she leaned into me showed how much she wanted this moment. When I felt her tongue lightly touch my lips, I pulled her closer, not minding anything else around us. It felt nice to be so close to her. At that moment, all my doubts about our relationship disappeared. As we shared the kiss, I had to hold back the strong urge to touch her more intimately. Instead, I let my hands glide along her back, feeling her warmth. Once or twice, my fingers brushed her side, and I heard her soft sighs. Later, Amy sighed happily. "Thank you for not rushing into things, Robbie. I know you wanted to. Honestly, I did too. But it means a lot that you took your time." I kissed her quickly again and said, "I'm trying my best not to rush things, but I care about you deeply, and I know we will get there." She gently stroked my cheek and said, "I know, dear. I appreciate it. Soon I will be all yours. But tonight, would you just hold me?" I nodded as she turned and cuddled against me, and we fell asleep with my hand resting softly on her leg. When I woke up, we were still wrapped together. The morning brought a sense of comfort we both enjoyed, and I realized I was holding her closeness. Even though my hand was outside her shirt, it felt wonderful to wake up next to her. As I became more alert, I removed my hand, and she sighed at the change. "That felt nice, Robbie. I would love to wake up like that every day." Her sleepy voice carried a happiness that I felt deep inside me. I leaned in and kissed her neck, taking in her unique scent. Amy had a fresh smell, more natural, reminding me of the pleasant scent after a rainstorm. After a few minutes of gentle kisses, we reluctantly got up to get ready for the day, knowing we had our first long drive ahead. We shared breakfast with Darren and Tony, enjoying fruit and yogurt. Darren made me promise to keep training for a big fight he had scheduled for me while we ate. Amy chimed in, saying she would help me stay on track with my training as we cleaned up and prepared to leave. I packed the last few bags into my old Toyota Camry. After saying our goodbyes, we hit the road. We drove for a few hours. My car was old, so we didn't have Bluetooth or music apps. Instead, we listened to a local rock station at a low volume while enjoying an easy talk. We chatted about the landmarks and road work we saw along the way. Our conversation covered everything from religion to politics. I was impressed by how smart Amy was, especially when she understood the references I made. As we talked, her hand would sometimes brush against my leg. I began to feel hopeful that our relationship could grow stronger. I used to live on the Gold Coast, a little over an hour south of Brisbane, which is the nearest capital city. As we drove north, Amy mentioned she lived about an hour and a half north of Brisbane, mostly along the highway, in a place called the Sunshine Coast. About an hour past Brisbane, I noticed Amy starting to get nervous. She fidgeted and stole glances at me before looking out the window. I noticed her unease but didn't say anything, choosing to keep quiet and give her space. Although I was starting to really care for her, her nervousness puzzled me after the time we spent together. I thought she wanted me to join her. Instead of excitement, she seemed anxious. Almost like she had a big secret she was worried I wouldn't like. I decided to wait, knowing I would eventually learn what was bothering her. After we left the highway, Amy directed me to a service station with a small diner so I could refuel. When I went to pay, she followed with a bag she was holding carefully. After I paid for the gas, she gestured for me to follow her to the most private table in the diner. "Robbie," she said, reaching out to hold my arm, "I really want you to know how much this means to me. The time we've spent together these past few months has felt like a dream." "I sense there's more," I replied, curious about where this was leading. She bit her lip and nodded, opening her bag to take out a folder filled with documents. "There is more to say, but it's not what you think. Please trust me, as what I'm about to share is very important. My parents and my sisters don't know what I'm going to tell you." I looked at her with curiosity as she handed me the folder and asked me to read the papers inside. While I began reading, Amy excused herself to get us some drinks. She came back a few minutes later with a Coke for me and lemonade for herself. The papers were legal forms that warned me. They made it clear that if I said the wrong thing to certain people, I could get into trouble. The people I had to be careful around included my family. The papers reminded me of the annual forms I had to sign for my insurance at Total Build. While I looked over the fine print, Amy watched me sip her drink. She looked worried. When I finished reading, Amy took a pen from her bag and handed it to me. I stared at her. "Do you trust me?" she asked, sounding nervous. I paused to think about the woman in front of me. I had known her since she was 15. Back then, she was very thin and flat. Today, she had grown into a woman that caught people's attention, even in casual clothes. With her pale skin, straight black hair, and bright blue eyes, she looked confident but still uneasy about asking me to sign something without explaining what it was for. Amy hadn't mentioned these papers before we left. She also hadn't waited to tell me until we got there. I remembered last night, when she had cuddled with me in bed, our touches growing warmer even though my divorce from her sister was coming soon. Looking at the documents, I didn't see anything that would harm me or put me in a difficult position. Still, I wanted to believe in her. I took the pen and began to sign, dating the papers as needed. With every signature, I noticed Amy's smile getting bigger. When I was done, I handed her the folder with the signed papers. She carefully put it back in her bag, but I could see that she was shaking a bit. Then she walked around the table, set down the bag, sat on my lap, and kissed me. Suddenly, she pulled back and looked into my eyes. "I love you, Robbie. I hope you know that." I chuckled. "Amy, I just signed some legal papers. I'm not saying he'll marry you." She pretended to be hurt and moved back to her seat. She picked up her drink and smiled at me. Just before taking a sip of her lemonade, she glanced at me from the corner of her eye. "Not yet," she said playfully as she took a drink. "Huh?" I replied, distracted by her action. "You haven't agreed to marry me yet," she said with a smile. "Well," I laughed, "I think the day is still young." We laughed for a bit about nothing in particular, until an older couple nearby stood up and left, leaving us alone in the food area. "Robbie," Amy said more seriously as she watched them go, "thank you for signing the documents. I know that was tough for you to trust me after everything your family has done." I nodded, letting her take the lead. "Let's start at the beginning," Amy said, looking at me closely. "I want you to understand why we're here and why these documents matter." I stayed quiet and nodded again. "Do you remember when we first met? I was a bit of a nerd, right?" she asked. I chuckled. "A bit of a nerd? Amy, you were 15 and a total nerd. You could do things with computers that I didn't even understand. And I'm not bad with technology." She laughed and gave my hand a little squeeze. "No, you're not. But yes, I was a nerd, and I still am," Amy said proudly, smiling widely. "One of the things I did back then was play with cryptocurrency when it was mainly just Bitcoin mining and not worth much." My eyes widened as I realized where she was going with this, and she smiled at me knowingly. "Yes," she said. "I had a lot of Bitcoins when the price exploded. I was smart to sell most of them at the right times." "So, you're doing well?" I asked, curious about my new girlfriend's financial situation. "That's one way to say it," Amy replied softly. "After cashing out a significant part of my crypto, I didn't just sit back. I took my money, did my research, and started an investment company called Alro. I put 90% of what I earned into the company, and now I spend a lot of time looking at companies and startups that can make good returns. I have a small team, about 6 people live here on the coast, a few in the United States and some in Europe. In the past year, we've done so well that we've had U.S. investors giving us money for our next projects." Amy smiled at me. "You know how Americans like a determined Australian. I'm young, and I can say g'day just the way they want, so Alro has been profitable." "How much profit are we talking about?" I asked, curious if she would share. Amy looked at me for a moment before smiling. "After costs, Alro made a $6 million profit last year." $6 million in profit? I was amazed. "Yes, and I take a 10% cut of the profit," she added proudly. "Wow, just wow." I looked at Amy with a new level of admiration. She had a clever smile that lit up her face. "That's why the legal agreements," Amy concluded, wrapping up her explanation. "I don't share much about my life with others, especially outside of work. And I've never told my parents because I didn't want them to know. I worried they might ask me for money. They think I have a regular office job and not that I own a company. In a few years, it won't matter since I plan to settle down and start a family. But for now, I want to stay out of the spotlight." I chuckled a bit. My girlfriend had been keeping her success a secret from us all these years. "What happens next?" I asked. "I take you home and we live happily ever after," she said confidently. We both smiled and chatted for a while as I processed what Amy had shared with me. Then we got back in her car, and Amy guided me to her place. When people think of wealthy homes, they imagine big houses on hills or fancy mansions. Amy's home was more of the second type. As we drove through Noosa, Amy had me go up a steep hill to her house, which was now my home too. We passed through large security gates into a beautiful area with palm trees, neat lawns, and colorful flowers. The house itself was modern, with interesting shapes and a polished look. Following Amy's directions, I parked my car beneath a shelter. I felt a bit embarrassed to have my old car in front of such a stunning house, but Amy didn't mind. She unlocked the grand double doors with a card and helped me carry in my bags. Inside, I noticed several rooms, but a short walk led us to a living space that had a fantastic view of the ocean. I stood there, amazed by the scenery. "Do you like it?" Amy asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. For a moment, I was speechless, taking in the sight. "Amy, this is incredible. I've never seen a view like this," I replied. I loved the ocean, and when I trained for my workouts, I preferred running on the beach instead of a treadmill. This would be a perfect spot for me. Amy laughed while holding on to me, and I kept gazing at the view. "You should see Mrs. Raddat's view up the hill. She's an older lady who looks out for me. Her balcony view is amazing too. Thank you for appreciating this one." Then Amy took me up a small flight of stairs to the master bedroom. It was nicely decorated with a large TV on one wall, and I noticed a PlayStation and an Xbox set up underneath. I smiled, just like Amy. She was a gamer even at home. The room had an entry to a bathroom and a walk-in closet on one side, and opposite was a balcony with a big glass door that offered more beautiful views. I walked up to the door and opened it to the balcony. Stepping outside, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath of the fresh sea air. I could feel the stress from my time on the Gold Coast fading away. Soon, my divorce from Georgia would be finalized, and my family was far enough away that I wouldn't have to see them for a long time if I didn't want to. I realized I had been standing there for a few minutes when Amy joined me, handing me a drink, a mix of rum and cola. It looked like she had the same. I raised an eyebrow and she smiled at me. "Hey, I've liked you for a long time," she said. "I know you enjoy this drink, so why shouldn't I like it too?" I laughed, holding my glass to the side and clinking it with hers before taking a few big sips. As I savored the flavor, we sat down in the chairs on the patio, enjoying a peaceful moment. The only sound came from the waves crashing on the shore, a calming rhythm that matched the beautiful view. "What's on your mind?" Amy asked with a laugh, and I smiled back. "Amy?" I started but hesitated, letting my shoulders slump as I leaned against the balcony rail. I stared out at the ocean, and a moment later, I felt her hand gently touch my arm. I wasn't sure why, but I began to cry, my tears falling to the ground below, leaving wet marks on the concrete. I glanced at Amy, who looked at me with kindness. I sensed she knew I needed this moment. Being away from everything allowed me to relax, and it felt like the first step toward healing. After a few moments, I took a deep breath, looking into my drink before gazing back at the ocean. "Amy, over the last year, I've felt angry and lost. I thought I had a loving family with a wife who was everything to me, and I dreamed of being a dad." I paused, offering her a small, sad smile. She gently touched my hand without saying anything. "I spent too much time feeling sorry for myself. If it weren't for Darren and Tony in those early days, I might have taken a different path." I felt her hand squeeze mine as she inhaled sharply, still saying nothing. I spotted a ship on the horizon and smiled. "A couple of months ago, Joanna came to see me, bringing a friend who supported her. I discovered this woman had liked me for years but never shared it." Amy nodded and smiled back, still quiet. "Since then, she has been there for me, calling when we can't be together, and holding my hand when we are." She laughs with me, and I know she will cry with me because her hurt is the same as mine from losing a sister. Then she asks me to run away with her, pointing to the ocean and the house behind us. I realize that not only does she like me, but she has grown to love me. She is wealthy, very smart, has a great sense of humor, and kisses very well. Her stunning blue eyes can compete with the beauty of the ocean around us. I turn to her and gently hold her chin, then move my hand to cup her cheek as I look deep into her eyes. "Amy," I say, taking a deep breath as I prepare to express my feelings. "You told me earlier that you love me. I know I still have scars from my past. I know there's still a lot of pain inside me, but you brought me here because you care. I believe. No. I know that the feelings are there. They started growing when you stayed behind with me, after Joanna left. I'm confused and can hardly believe I can feel this way, but Amy, I love you too." "Robbie?" Amy asks softly, her voice shaking. "You love me? As in, you really care about me?" She sounds like she can hardly believe it. When she sees the tears in my eyes, I nod. "I do, Amy. I truly do. I know I have my issues, but I love you just as much, if not more than I ever loved Georgia. This feels stronger, especially since we're just starting our journey together. I love you because you haven't pushed me for anything. You never demanded anything from me. When I look at you, my heart races. When you're not with me, it feels like all the warmth has left the room. When my phone rings, I rush to it hoping that it's you. Every day I find it hard to think about leaving you. Even if all we had was a small rented apartment with noisy neighbors banging on the walls or having parties late into the night, I still would want to be with you." Amy laughs. "We can move there if that's what you want, but I like this place. As long as I'm with you, I'm happy to live anywhere." I smile and kiss her gently before we sit at the balcony table again. "So, what's next?" I ask. Amy takes a sip of her drink, thinking for a moment as we relax together. "Well," she says, "not many people know about Alro outside the investment world, and everyone who does is bound by the same privacy rules that you are, believe it or not. I am too." I raise my eyebrows in surprise. "I want to keep my money safe, Robbie. I worked hard for it. Sure, I was in the right place at the right time at first, but it worked out because of that privacy. We make investments quietly as private equity. Most of the time, things go well with the right support." "I mean what I said," Amy told me seriously. "I want you to come with me. I need to visit the staff in the US and Europe at Alro, and I'd love it if you joined me." "You want me to join you?" I asked, raising my eyebrow, which made her giggle again. "Yes, Robbie. I really want you with me every night. I want you away from my difficult sister and your messy family for a few months. When we return, I have an idea for you," she said, a playful smile appearing on her face. I laughed. "I'm sure you do." I realized that Amy often had a plan. "Okay, let's go for it." Her smile captured my attention, and I found myself staring at her. "Amy," I said, a playful grin spreading across my face. "Yes?" she asked, her expression brightening. "Be my girlfriend," I said. She didn't say anything, but she set her drink down and kissed me. "That's a yes," I said when she pulled back. She playfully slapped my arm. "Of course. I've been your girlfriend since I helped you out of jail." We both laughed and pulled out our chairs, spending the rest of the afternoon discussing all the places she wanted to take me. Later that night, as we walked to a lovely Italian restaurant in the nearby village, we continued our conversation. Amy seemed more energized than ever, excited to share her world with me. When we returned to her house, she showed me where I could unpack my things. There were drawers in the walk-in wardrobe just for me. After that, she excused herself to make a few calls and told me to explore the house, take a shower, and relax. I roamed around, amazed at everything. There were 5 bedrooms, and 2 of them shared a bathroom while the other 3 had their own. Every room had a beautiful view of the water. I also found a well-organized workout room with space for weights, a punching bag, and various machines. I was impressed. Then I discovered a media room that could seat 12 people, and a wine cupboard that was well-stocked and temperature-controlled. The kitchen had plenty of space, a butler's pantry, and 3 ovens for cooking. As I continued my exploration, I could hear Amy in what I guessed was her home office. She was on a conference call, discussing companies I didn't know much about. From what I gathered, she was asking for several financial reports. I also overheard her telling a lady with an English accent that both of us would be visiting soon. At one point, I peeked into her office. It was a large room filled with screens, TVs, and cameras while she waited for a connection. She waved for me to come in. I smiled and shook my head because I wanted to take my time entering her work life. I headed back to the main bedroom and jumped into the shower. The water pressure was amazing. It felt strong, like my worries were being washed away once again. Afterward, I sat outside on the deck, enjoying the view and the gentle evening breeze. I called Darren and Tony to let them know that Amy and I had arrived safely. They wanted to hear about the place. I kept my answers brief, unsure of what I could share. We talked about my training for the upcoming fight. And halfway through the chat, Amy came out onto the balcony with a smile when she realized I was talking to Darren and Tony. I switched to speakerphone, and the 4 of us chatted for about half an hour about the trip. And, of course, Darren asked about my training schedule. I laughed at his question. "You should see the gym setup Amy has here, Darren. It's going to be amazing to train in." Quickly, I realized what I said and looked at Amy, worried. She just laughed. "It really is, Darren," Amy said, her eyes shining. "I use it when I can, but honestly, about a month ago, I set it up for Robbie so he would have a place to train. We will get you up soon. Sound good?" "Sounds great. I can't wait to see your new place." "Robbie," Darren replied, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. I mouthed an apology to Amy, but she smiled and waved it off. She indicated she was going to take a shower and told me to keep chatting. Darren and I talked about preparing for my first big fight, which was set a few weeks later in Brisbane. It would be a significant event since it was my first professional match. Darren thought I was ready. This time we would be driving from different directions instead of together. A few minutes later, I ended the call and went back into the room. Amy, just out of the shower, came into the bedroom. "Amy, I'm so sorry about what I said about the gym. My voice trailed off. I couldn't find the right words. Amy stood in the doorway between the bedroom and the bathroom, wearing something light. It was delicate and didn't cover much. As I mentioned earlier, while Amy and Georgia look alike, that's where their similarity ends. They are only half-sisters, sharing the same mother but having different fathers. Amy's father, Peter, is one of the most relaxed, wonderful guys I know. Amy's striking looks and presence were clearly inherited from her father's side. Her beauty and confidence radiated in a way that left others in awe. I'd already mentioned her deep black hair and piercing blue eyes, but now, seeing her framed in the doorway, I could feel the strong pull she had on me, both in her charm and her natural grace. Her long, dark hair flowed smoothly over her shoulders, catching the light, and her clear, pale skin had a glow that seemed to radiate warmth and sincerity. She wore just a hint of makeup, enough to enhance her features without overpowering her natural beauty. As my gaze moved downward, I took in her tall and graceful figure. She stood with an effortless confidence, her posture open and inviting as she smiled, clearly noticing my admiration. Her gentle laugh broke my gaze, bringing me back to the moment. "You like what you see?" she asked with a playful smile, moving with a quiet elegance as she approached. "Amy, you're truly beautiful," I replied, feeling a genuine warmth and excitement as she came closer. She laughed softly, teasing me as our eyes met. "Oh, I bet you say that to everyone," she joked, her eyes sparkling with humor. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Honestly, you're the only one who's ever made me lose my train of thought," I answered, smiling back as we shared a few quiet moments. She held out her hand and we moved to sit together, lost in conversation and shared glances. As we sat there enjoying each other's company, we spent the next several minutes simply appreciating the closeness, exchanging smiles and quiet laughter. It was one of those rare, perfect moments where the only thing that mattered was being together and sharing the happiness of each other's company. I felt like Amy was really enjoying herself as she let out a soft sound of pleasure. When I moved to kiss her other nipple, I noticed a tiny drop of moisture forming there. I looked up at Amy, and she was watching me closely, her eyes filled with expectation. Amy blushed when our eyes met. "My breasts are very sensitive, Robbie. I often leak a little when I'm excited. It's not milk, but..." She didn't finish her thought as I kissed her gently. Amy let out a pleased sound. There was a hint of sweetness to her, mixed with a natural scent that reminded me of her. Though I wanted to keep exploring, I was focused on getting to know my girlfriend's body. I moved down and kissed her stomach, noticing her belly button was unique. A cute little swirl that I admired for a moment. As I continued downward, I chose to skip a certain area. For a moment, Amy looked disappointed, as if she expected me to go there. Instead, I lifted her leg and kissed from her calf to her thigh, repeating the same on the other leg. By the time I reached her, she was visibly excited, her breathing quickening. I smiled at her and she gave a nod, allowing me to gently move aside her delicate lace. What I saw was beautiful. Amy had a lovely shape and seemed ready for more. I approached her like a thirsty traveler finding water after a long journey. Before meeting Amy, I had shared special moments with two other women, my high school girlfriend and my soon-to-be ex-wife, Georgia. But Amy felt different. I was eager to make sure she was happy, and I focused on her completely. In a short time, Amy felt overwhelmed with joy, and I could see her delight. I kept going, wanting to ensure she felt satisfied. In just a little while, she had reached that blissful moment multiple times, asking me to slow down. She pulled me closer, kissing me deeply, and didn't mind that I was still feeling the effects of our connection. This moment felt different from my past. It was warm and genuine, with Amy embracing every part of it. Amy leaned close, her hand resting on mine as we shared a quiet, tender moment. Her eyes met mine with warmth and care, and I could see the depth of her feelings in the way she looked at me. She smiled softly, lifting her hand to rest on my shoulder as we sat together. "You know," she said, laughing a little, "you're different from anyone I've ever known. I didn't expect to feel this way." We sat quietly for a few moments, just enjoying the peace of being together. She looked at me, her expression thoughtful as though she were seeing something new in me. I reached out, placing my hand over hers, feeling a calm happiness I had felt in a long time. The connection between us felt real and meaningful. As we talked, we began sharing little stories and memories, laughing and learning more about each other. It felt effortless, like being with someone I'd known forever. We spent what felt like hours just talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company, as if time had stopped just for us. After a while, We lay back, watching the ceiling, content in the simple quiet of the room. There was a kind of completeness to it, as though we had both found something we hadn't realized we were searching for. We exchanged small, gentle touches, hands meeting and resting together, savoring the comfort of being close without needing words. It was a moment of peace, the world outside fading away. As the night deepened, we drifted off to sleep, side by side, knowing this was a memory that would stay with us, a quiet, perfect evening, shared with someone who felt like home. Amy slowly leaned forward, her expression filled with trust and warmth as she looked into my eyes. I could feel the depth of her feelings as she took my hand, holding it close, her touch gentle yet steady. She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, everything around us seemed to quiet down. "Robbie, I love you," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with emotion. Her words carried a significance that struck me deeply. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, wanting her to know how much I cared. The feeling of simply being together, close and comfortable, was enough to fill the moment. We lay back, holding each other as time passed slowly, sharing small whispers and enjoying each other's presence. She looked up at me, her eyes shining, and I could see how much she trusted me. We were wrapped in a quiet comfort, each moment building on the last, as we lay together in peaceful silence. Later, she got up and walked into the bathroom, bringing back a warm cloth to freshen up. She handed it to me, laughing gently as we took care of the small, simple things together, each gesture filled with care. It was a quiet, special moment that felt like something only the two of us shared. Afterward, she suggested we shower together, leading me into the warm spray of water. We laughed, talking quietly as we washed, the simple act of helping each other a gentle, meaningful ritual. She even had a few shower gels she had chosen just for me, explaining that she wanted me to feel at home in her space. "Did your last boyfriend leave these here?" I teased, chuckling. She playfully gave me a light nudge, pretending to be hurt. "Robbie, you goof," she said with a smile. "There has only ever been you. I've been on a handful of dates in my life." Her honesty and the simplicity of her words made me smile. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, sharing the happiness of knowing that, in each other, we'd found something real. It was a perfect end to a night we'd both remember, but none got more than a kiss on the cheek, and no one had a second date because they weren't you. "It has always been you," she said shyly. I hugged her as she began to tear up, holding her close as the water flowed over us. "I'm sorry, dear," I said gently. "I know you gave me a wonderful gift earlier, but I thought, well, you were so amazing, how could I?" For a moment, she looked up at me, her eyes misty but holding a sparkle of joy. The fear of rejection drifted away as she realized I wasn't judging her for her past. "I'm a bit of a nerd, remember?" Amy said. "I may not have much experience, but I've watched a lot of films and have had some fun toys." She hesitated, deciding if she wanted to share more. I held her close as the water flowed around us. She rested her head on my chest. I thought about going further. I tried a few things, but I couldn't. Amy said, her hands resting gently on me. "But I am so glad I got to be with you first. For so long, I dreamed of you being my first Robbie. I was even jealous of my sister. But tonight I finally felt like I belonged to you." I kissed her softly, and we exchanged sweet words about love and promises for the future. After we got out of the shower and dried off, we returned to the bedroom, changed the sheets, and snuggled in bed, our arms around each other. As we both drifted off, I reflected on the past year. Despite the rough times in my life, I felt thankful that everything had happened as it did, because it led me here, in Amy's arms. I listened as Amy's breathing grew steady and deep as she fell asleep. I kissed her head, feeling sleep pull me in too. I whispered, "I love you," as my last thought. It felt like she tightened her hold and sighed lightly as I finally fell into a deep sleep for the first time in months. The next month was full of activity. Amy introduced me to her team in Noosa, including her housekeeper and gardener who helped keep the place neat, especially when she was away. When they realized who I was, everyone smiled during the introductions. They all knew Amy had liked me for a long time and were glad she was happy. Amy also arranged for me to meet her lawyer, George Brady. He was a distinguished older man, just as you would expect from a top lawyer. At Amy's request, George took over handling my divorce. As he managed Amy's legal affairs, it meant he also took care of my situation now that I was with her. George informed me that I needed to attend a final meeting with Georgia in a couple of weeks because we were completing the last of the paperwork, and he would be there with me. As we reviewed the case file, George pointed out that, like many others in similar situations, Georgia's lawyer was trying to delay the process. Georgia thought that if she fought hard enough, I would change my mind about the divorce. However, I was clear that nothing would stop the divorce since we had proof from my video and a test showing that while Georgia's son was connected to me, he was not my son. There would be no chance of us getting back together, and neither Georgia nor my family could change my mind. I told George that at first, Georgia and my family had tried to pass her child off as mine. But they backed off when my previous lawyer explained that it could be seen as dishonesty and would not look good for any of them if it became known. As my new lawyer, George believed we would not have any trouble finishing the divorce. I was a bit surprised when he changed the subject. Peering over his glasses, he warned me to take care of Amy. He saw Amy less as a client and more like a daughter, so he would be keeping an eye on me. I smiled back and assured him I would be careful to ensure he did not take advantage of Amy, since he was a tough lawyer. By the end of our conversation, we shared a good laugh like old friends, both pushing each other yet showing we cared about Amy. It felt different, but I realized for the first time, I liked a lawyer. Over the next few years, George would become a close friend. I believe Amy and I spent more time with him and his wife, Cynthia, than we did in a professional setting. Amy also asked George to help me update my passport and arrange my visas so that I could travel with her on her upcoming trip abroad. We were set to leave a few days after the divorce was finalized. The last thing on my mind was my first professional fight coming up. It would take place in Brisbane, and I was a bit nervous because it was going to be broadcast on one of the cable channels. The opponent I was facing was a professional fighter from the States. I was to serve as a warm-up match before he faced a well-known Aussie fighter scheduled to fight him a couple of weeks after me. I anticipated the fight to be tough. I knew I could hold my ground against him, but I wasn't expecting to win. I was surprised when Amy arranged for Darren and Tony to sign privacy agreements a few weeks before the fight, bringing them in to help me train for the last 2 weeks. Darren would work with me on my training, while Tony managed my diet. Once they got over the initial shock of Amy's situation, Darren took training seriously, pushing me hard hour after hour. We ran 10 kilometers on the beach 2 times each day. Darren made me run at least half of that on the soft sand before pushing me hard in the gym. Darren worked as a trainer at a gym that focused on martial arts. We met a few years back when I wanted to try different styles. At first, I trained for mental focus. The variety of movements helped me relax and taught me to respond better in my business life. After training with me for a few months, Darren thought I had potential as an amateur MMA fighter. He believed I could benefit from participating in some local matches. Over the years, Darren became my mentor and coach through many fights. Though I had only made a little money from fighting, my reputation increased. Last year, I had a lot of energy to release, which caught the attention of the National MMA League. They wanted me to fight a professional. This televised fight meant we would earn a good paycheck, win or lose. For Darren, even a draw would be almost 3 months' worth of pay. I didn't have a job, so earning some extra money made me feel less like I was living off my girlfriend, Amy. Every other day, Darren changed our routine. We would run twice the distance with a light workout, then spend hours watching my opponent's fight videos to discuss strategy. The best part of my day was the evenings. Amy gave me wonderful massages to help my tired muscles relax. Tony prepared our meals. I was used to strict diets before fights, but this was even more controlled. She managed calories, sugars, and fats very well. Tony was great at cooking, and I was glad the food tasted good. When she wasn't focusing on my diet, Tony spent a lot of time with Amy. I noticed a sisterly bond forming between Tony and Amy. Tony had lost her younger sister in a tragic accident years ago, so I was happy that Amy could provide her with some comfort. On the day of the fight, Amy, Darren, Tony, and I traveled to Brisbane in Darren's truck. I was surprised to see some of Amy's staff there, too. They had never seen an MMA fight before. MMA means mixed martial arts. I used my black belt in karate and my Muay Thai skills together, believing it was a strong combination. In the dressing room, we prepared for the fight. While Amy and Tony watched, I went through my warm-up exercises with Darren, focusing on stretching and movement. The goal was to be ready to face my opponent right away when I entered the ring. The event organizer came in about an hour before the fight to tell us that the reporters and camera crews were ready for the pre-fight meeting. My opponent, Cody McGuinness, was a tall man, standing at 6 feet 3 inches. He was very big and strong, especially in his arms. He had experience in boxing and some training in taekwondo, but boxing was where he excelled. He joined the U.S. Professional League a few years back after winning 3 fights by knockout. He was ranked a bit below middle in the Professional MMA League in the U.S. While he wasn't super famous, many people followed his matches, which helped get this fight shown on cable sports channels. He made good money, but I thought about how he could retire comfortably with the costs of his team that traveled the world with him. As we walked to the interview area, Cody and I posed for a few promotional shots together, and then separately. We also did some more intense poses together before heading to the weigh-in. I thought Cody was a decent guy beneath his tough exterior, but he seemed confident about winning. After the promotional part was over, he came up to shake my hand. "I wish you luck tonight, Robbie, but I have to say I'm sorry that I will have to beat you," Cody said seriously. I rolled my eyes, thinking it was all part of the mental game we fighters played with each other. "No worries, mate," I joked, using a playful accent. "Just make sure to delay your next fight after I get you checked out at the hospital," I replied, with a grin. He chuckled good-naturedly, resting his hands on his hips. "Sure, little man, whatever you say. Just so you know, I've already planned for an ambulance. If your friend needs a ride later, I'll be happy to help," he said, nodding toward Amy with a smirk. He turned and walked away, leaving me to look at Amy. She was bright red after Cody's teasing comments. "Don't worry, he's just joking. It's part of the mind games to get into my head before we fight," I assured her as I walked over. "I know," she replied, watching him leave. "But that still seems really mean." I chuckled. Honestly, he was pretty mild. Some guys really go all out, swearing and getting in your face. We both laughed at that. "Speaking of families," Tony interrupted, looking a bit shy. "Your family is in the audience tonight." "What?" Amy and I exclaimed together, turning to Tony. She nodded. Sorry, but I thought you should know now so you can get ready," Tony said. I saw them in line for tickets earlier. It seemed like everyone was here. Georgia, Joanna, your parents, and even your brother. Just what I needed, I said, feeling down. Suddenly, Amy pulled me aside. Use it, she said urgently. Use what? I replied. Them! She pointed towards the stage doors where the crowd would soon fill the arena. Use the hurt they've caused you to fuel your fight. If you can't move on from it, let it drive you to show them your strength. About an hour later, I was feeling loose and ready when I stepped into the ring. I glanced at my family. They waved, but I looked away. The fight took place in a small arena that was about half full. If it weren't for my opponent, it could have been at a nice gym. The event organizers wanted Cody to get used to the venue for his bigger fight in a few weeks. According to reports, I was just a warm-up for him. The arena had over 700 seats, and my family ended up in the upper sections, which was fine by me. None of them had come to any of my fights before, including Georgia. She thought it was too brutal. And while she liked fitness and a fit partner, she wouldn't attend when we were together. Now that we were separating, it was clear they wanted me back at Total Build. I figured the upcoming court date was the only reason they showed up. Through Amy's dad, Peter, I learned that Total Build was struggling. My parents had to let go of about a third of the staff. They lost several clients because of mismanaged quotes, including the job that started all of this chaos. While she loved being a mom, Peter mentioned that Georgia wasn't happy with Brad Jr. My older brother was not stepping up as a father. After I left, he quickly moved in with my ex-wife. I heard gossip that he preferred drinking or pretending to work instead of being at home. He often referred to his son as the brat, thinking it was funny. So, with some satisfaction knowing my family was having a tough time and my ex-wife was struggling, I was ready to take on Cody with everything I had. Cody entered the arena to a much louder cheer than I received. Music played and a big video showed him off as the top fighter in what he thought was a small scene. We touched gloves and returned to our corners. When the bell rang, we both rushed out fast. Cody, with his boxing skills, aimed for my face with quick punches to throw me off balance. I quickly dodged, going for his legs with some moves I'd learned. He nearly fell 3 times in that first round, but managed to stay upright. He hit me a couple of times. I have to admit they hurt a bit, but I got in a few good hits on his sides, so I knew I had made my mark too. By the end of that round, I felt we were about even. When the bell rang for the second round, I noticed that Cody seemed more careful now. In round 2, we exchanged punches again. As a boxer, he focused on my head, trying to land a knockout punch. He hit me a couple more times, making me feel a bit dizzy, but I fought back hard, landing several punches to his midsection and legs, and even one to his head. Still, he managed to remain on his feet. During round 3, we moved around, and the referee had to step in to separate us when we got too close. That's when I made a mistake. For just a moment, I took my eyes off Cody. I got distracted by my older brother who was laughing and pointing at me. That moment of distraction cost me. Cody's punch hit me right in the face, and I fell hard. For a moment, I was stunned, and the referee started counting. By the time I realized what was happening, he was at 4. I got back up, and the referee looked me in the eyes to check if I could continue. I nodded, but couldn't help glancing at my brother, who was grinning and chatting with everyone around him, his arm around Georgia's shoulders. My parents and sister were laughing at whatever he was saying. I felt a rush of anger. I shook off the last of my confusion as the referee stepped back, and then it was time to fight again. This time, my punches felt stronger, and I started using my legs and knees more. Cody looked surprised, shifting into a defensive posture. He raised his arms to protect himself from the series of punches I aimed at him. After a tough exchange, where I hit him hard and then paused to catch my breath, I saw my chance. He was shifting his stance, thinking that I would take a moment to rest. Honestly, I was feeling the effects of his earlier punch, and I was tired. But he made a mistake by lowering his arms momentarily, thinking I was out of reach. That was my moment. That was when I made my move. Just like I had done before, I charged at Cody with a powerful kick aimed at his head. As I launched my attack, everything seemed to slow down, and I focused on my goal. The noise from the crowd quieted down, and all eyes seemed to focus on my foot, moving towards Cody's head. I turned my body while kicking, putting extra force into my strike. My foot hit his cheek, and he'll never forget the gasp from the audience. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze as energy transferred from my foot to Cody's head. As I finished my turn, Cody fell against the side of the ring. He landed on his side, his mouth guard hanging loose. His body shook a little, but his eyes were shut, and he began to drool. No one said a word as the referee rushed to check on Cody and started counting. Cody didn't move. When the bell rang, the crowd erupted into cheers. I raised my fist in the air, turning to celebrate with everyone. But when I looked at Brad Jr., Georgia, and my family, they were not cheering. Brad looked worried, remembering my move from a few months ago. I locked eyes with him and whispered, "You got this." My brother took a seat, and he understood. An ambulance crew came into the arena to check on Cody, who was still unconscious. After using smelling salts and doing some checks, they took him out on a stretcher to the hospital. The referee took my hand and spoke into the microphone. "The winner by knockout, your new champion, Robbie Other," he announced. Soon after, Darren, Tony, and Amy were in the ring. Darren was grinning widely, and Tony was cheering proudly. Amy hugged me tightly. It felt a bit painful, but I was happy. Then she kissed me, which made the crowd cheer even more. I noticed 3 things when I looked up. The sports reporter was excitedly talking about me on camera. Amy wouldn't let go of me. And my family seemed to be arguing with Georgia about her being in the ring with me. I gestured for my family to come over to Darren, Tony, and Amy. They followed my gesture, and we all laughed as they exchanged words back and forth. For the next 2 hours, I went through post-match checks. Darren was pleasantly surprised by our winnings. We earned a lot more than we expected since the odds were in Cody's favor as a well-known MMA star, so we didn't just get enough for drinks this time. During the post-match interview, reporters wanted to know what happened in the 3rd round that motivated me. I made up a story about digging deep for strength. Then, they asked about my finishing move. Well, I smiled. I have to thank my brother for that one. He opened my eyes to new possibilities a few months ago. My family might never see the interview. Then again, who knows? After I finished, I went back into the dressing room. Darren, Tony, and Amy followed me. "That was ridiculous," Amy said as soon as we were away from the reporters. I looked at her in surprise. Her eyes weren't angry. They were full of laughter. "What do you mean?" I asked, watching Darren take off the wraps from my hands while Tony brought over an ice bucket. "I said that was ridiculous, baby," Amy said, now laughing. "What you just told that reporter was complete nonsense. And we all know it." "Well," I smiled at her tease. "What was I supposed to say? I got upset because my brother was laughing at me while holding my soon-to-be ex-wife?" "I wouldn't have said it that way," Amy replied, trying to hold back her laughter. "But I know what really happened." Suddenly, Amy burst into laughter, and soon, Darren, Tony, and I joined in. Darren finished removing my wraps and had me put my hands in the ice for about 15 minutes. My gloves were lighter than most, which made the hits more intense. Even though I won against Cody, he still gave me a tough match. Honestly, if it wasn't for Brad Jr. trying to get inside my head, I might not have won. I thought about that for a moment. Robbie, you did great out there tonight. I don't think anyone expected that outcome, Tony said as she sat down on a bench. Me neither, I agreed, also taking a seat. My knuckles were starting to feel better, though I expected some swelling. Cody was a strong opponent. You did well, buddy, Darren said wisely. When you got back up after that hit, I thought you might lose your composure, but you kept it together. You found your openings, and wow, where did that kick come from? I explained how I had used a similar move against Brad a few months ago. Up until that point, Darren and Tony knew I had some trouble with the law, but didn't realize I had put Brad in the hospital for a couple of days. We laughed and discussed various moments from the fight while I relaxed. Darren noted that I had cooled down and took me into another room for a warm-down massage to help with my muscles before they tightened up. Afterwards, he sent me to shower in the locker room. When I got there, I found Amy in the shower, standing under the warm water with some soap and a washcloth. I smiled as she told me it was now her turn to take care of me. I decided right then that Amy should come to all my fights if my post-fight moments were going to feel like this. Darren and Tony were waiting for us with big smiles when we stepped out of the showers about 20 minutes later. I could only imagine what they had heard from the locker room. I felt more relaxed than ever after a fight. Most of the crowd had left, including my family, which made me feel relieved. We checked in with the event management team, and they gave me the okay to leave the arena. It was just after midnight as we walked out of the arena. I was tired and happy that Darren and Tony would drive us back to Amy's place. They wanted to spend a few days with us at the beach instead of the Gold Coast, where we had all lived for most of our lives. As we walked toward Darren's truck, we suddenly heard a voice call out. "Robbie, wait!" my mother called out. They must have been waiting at one of the entry gates for a while. My family all looked tired, and my mother was rushing ahead of the others with a worried expression. I turned when I heard her voice and stopped. Amy held my hand tightly, and Darren and Tony stopped a few steps behind us. "Robbie, please wait. Don't go," my mother said, closing the distance between us. I let go of Amy's hand and crossed my arms over my chest, looking at my mother. She didn't look well. Her hair was almost white now, while just a year ago it had been brown with some gray. Worry lines covered her face. And, though she had never been extremely fit, she seemed out of breath now, like she had run a long way. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, feeling Amy wrap her arm around my waist. My mother glanced at Amy quickly before focusing on me. Robbie. Joanna, Brad Jr., Georgia, and my father caught up, standing in a loose circle around us. Darren and Tony stayed a bit back, with Tony leaning against Darren. My father, like my mother, glanced at Amy, but then directed his attention to me. "Son, come home. It's been a year now. You've had your time away and we forgive you. It's time to come back," he said. Both Amy and I chuckled. "Time away?" I asked, smiling. "Yes, son," my father replied seriously like he was talking to a young child. "You shouldn't have walked out on us. We need you to let it go and come back." "Right," I replied, stretching the word. Amy scoffed. "And what do you mean you forgive him?" she said, sounding critical. "Be quiet, Amy. This isn't your concern," Georgia snapped at her younger sister. "Amy," my mother said before Amy could say more. Understanding dawned on her face as she glanced at my girlfriend. She connected the dots about the argument Georgia had with Brad and my father earlier. "So you're Georgia's sister?" "Half-sister," Amy answered with a smirk. "But yes, I have that unfortunate link to someone who gets involved with men besides her husband." The sisters shot sharp looks at each other. "Honestly," Amy added with a smile aimed at Georgia, "I think she must get her behavior from her dad. My father is very faithful to our mother." "Stop it, Amy," Georgia said again. "Robbie is still my husband." Only for a few more days. Then he's all mine, she declared proudly, wrapping her arm around my waist protectively. Georgia glared at her sister. I have to say it was amusing to see them bickering over me. So you're not even divorced? And you're with your wife's sister? Brad Jr. attempted to sound serious. Be quiet, Brad, Georgia shouted back at him. I could tell he wasn't ready to approach me. Amy and I chuckled again. I could hear Darren and Tony laughing softly behind us as well. At least I waited until I found out my ridiculous brother and ex-wife were sneaking around behind my back with family support, I chimed. Oh, and Brad, just between us. You can have Georgia. I think I picked the wrong sister the first time. Georgia doesn't compare to this little spark, I said, holding Amy closer and gazing at her warmly. Amy returned my look with a soft smile. A moment later, I glanced back at my older brother. He looked a little flushed. I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment, anger, or jealousy, but he was definitely embarrassed, so I thought I'd tease a little more since they came to see me. Hey, Brad, did you like my big move tonight? Did it feel a little familiar? I said with a grin. Brad turned even redder, clearly embarrassed. I was shorter than him, but I was pretty strong while he had let himself go. He glanced at me, but knew he wouldn't stand a chance. I laughed again, but turned my focus back to my father. So, Brad, I said, shifting the conversation back to the topic at hand as I looked at my father. Amy asked a good question. What have I done that you think I should be punished for? Shouldn't it be the other way around? You walked out on us, you ungrateful punk, he almost yelled at me. I think my lightheartedness with his other son had upset him. After everything we did for you, you just left. After everything you did for me, I replied, tilting my head. After everything you did? I asked in disbelief, struggling to understand his words. My sister Joanna, always ready to jump into a conversation, had to get involved. She certainly had a knack for picking the wrong side. Maybe that's why she never seemed to hold on to a relationship. Under that brown hair, she always seemed a little out of touch. Your job, you know, Joanna exclaimed, her nostrils flaring. Mom and Dad gave you a job right after high school, letting you study while you worked. Dad thinks you threw it back at them, that your little outburst is hurtful. Everyone could see what my parents were saying, but they didn't want to admit how I felt betrayed, or why they still thought it was okay to treat me like they did. I turned to my parents. Brad, Hattie, I said softly. Both Mom and Dad looked at me. Thank you for the job after high school. They smiled back. But the university was through a scholarship. I worked hard for that, and I never let my work disrespect what others have given me. Their smiles faded. I never let my training interfere with my job, and I never allowed my siblings' lack of effort to stop me from getting my work done. Can you say the same? Of course we can, my father replied quickly. Really? I shot back before he could respond further. So your family life is going great, and the business is thriving without me? They were silent. I didn't think so, I concluded. I lifted an eyebrow and looked at Georgia. Under my gaze, she took a small step back. My parents looked at her a bit embarrassed. Look, I sighed. Nothing has changed in a year. I asked all of you to give me space. I told you I wanted nothing to do with any of you. But you keep coming after me, acting like it's my fault your lives are difficult. It's not my fault. You all should be looking at yourselves. That's not fair, Robbie, Joanna pushed back. It's not our fault things went wrong for you. As soon as she said that, her hands flew to her mouth, realizing what she had done. Finally, someone said something I could agree with. Joanna glanced at Georgia, who was blushing deeply. No one else said anything, for once everyone was left speechless. I'm sorry, Georgie, it just slipped out, Joanna said. Then she turned to me, waving her hand at Georgia while glaring at me. See, if you had just followed the plan, I wouldn't have embarrassed my sister-in-law like that. I couldn't help but laugh, and I noticed Amy chuckling beside me. Look, as great as it is to see you, I said sarcastically. I appreciate everyone cheering for my fight tonight, but unless there's something really important to share, we have a long drive home. Where are you living? My mother asked. Far away from all of you, I replied, maybe a bit too sharply. You're staying with my sister, Georgia said, glaring at Amy. Sister? Amy said cheerfully, highlighting the tension. Sorry, sis, but I've only been with one guy in my whole life, and I'm not letting him go. I'm with Robbie now. You missed your chance. All right, ladies, I said. Georgia, it's time for you to move on. I don't want anything to do with you after how you treated me. The child isn't even mine. Amy, I said. She looked up at me with big eyes. Easy now. Amy gave a playful bark and smiled, looking quite happy. If she had a tail, I was sure it would be wagging. Everyone else, I told my family, understand that I'm not going back to Total Build. I have no desire to see, hear from, or talk to any of you if I can avoid it. But why? My mother asked, her voice sad. Do you really need me to explain after everything that happened this past year? Have you heard anything I've said? I replied. Come on, son. Haven't you ever made a mistake? Dad asked softly. Yes, many. But unlike you, I take responsibility for them. If I mess up, I apologize and try to make things right. I don't ignore someone's pain. Believe me, I feel hurt. Robbie, we're sorry, Mom began, but Dad interrupted her, holding her arm. Is that how you really feel? He asked. Can't you see it? I told him. You keep treating me poorly and act like nothing is wrong. Yet you think I'm the one to blame. That's not right. Of course I feel this way. For a moment, everyone was silent. Dad just looked at me deep in thought. Part of me hoped they would finally understand what I've been through. All right then, Dad said. We all turned to him. If that's how you feel, then you're out of this family, Dad said. Everyone gasped, including me. You think you're so special just because you're hurt, Dad continued. I could sense a lecture coming. But here's a reality check. You are not special. You were an unexpected child that we never planned for. Your only purpose was to support the company. You want to know why we never told you about Brad and Georgia? Because you didn't deserve to know. You've always believed you were better than everyone else. From what I see, you haven't worked since you left us. You've been living with some people who aren't really helpful and with your wife's half-sister. No, Brad, my mother said softly, trying to calm my father, but he didn't seem to notice. We gave you a year to sort things out, my father continued, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. We came tonight to make peace and offer you a chance to work with us again, expecting you to accept our kindness. But what do we find? A young man who thinks he deserves an apology and that he doesn't have to change. You're dreaming, kid. Brad Jr. smiled widely. Joanna glanced back at me, looking a bit worried, then at our father. I shrugged in response. But Dad was not done. So you choose to keep being difficult? Dad said. Fine, we can do that. Tomorrow, we'll visit the lawyers to remove you from our wills. We'll take action against you for hurting Total Build. You'll regret not accepting our forgiveness. For the rest of your life, you'll remember when we took everything from you, leaving you with nothing and making you pay us back for years because you couldn't get your act together. Are you done? I asked, raising my eyebrow. I was close to smirking. Not even close, my dad replied angrily. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you never have a good job again. Anytime I hear you have a job, I'll call them and tell them what a failure you are. I'll do my best to keep you struggling until you come back to us begging for our kindness. But then you'll find out there is no kindness left for you in this family. You'll be alone with nothing. Wow. He really means it, Amy said with a mocking tone, clearly enjoying the moment. And you better watch yourself too, young lady, my father warned. If you stay with him, I'll make things hard for you as well. Don't think I didn't hear. You went right to him the moment you could. You should be ashamed for wanting your sister's husband. Really? Amy asked, her smile growing. She pulled out her phone and showed that she was recording the conversation. Could you say that again? Oh, great one. This way. Robbie and I can listen to this while we try to make ends meet. My father paused for a moment, then looked at her phone. Everyone held their breath for a moment. From this day on, my father said in a serious tone, Robert Other is no longer part of this family. He will no longer benefit from it and will be removed from our wills. If he asks to come back, he will be turned away. As the owner of Total Build, I will take legal action against Robert Other for leaving his job at such a crucial time. I will also reach out to my connections to make sure that every possible employer and our suppliers know that we welcomed him back, but he declined. Our family will also make sure that you and Robert Other have no peace. We will teach you that you don't cross this family. Is that clear enough for you? Perfect, Amy said, putting away her phone. My father scoffed, and the rest of the family looked at him in shock. My mother kept glancing between my father and me. I think she realized that things were getting serious for the first time. Do whatever you want, he said sharply, looking at my girlfriend who was smiling. My dad, if he noticed, didn't show it. You're young, and I doubt you can find a lawyer as good as mine. By this time next year, you'll both regret this, with what this family will do to you. He shot me a final sneer, which I matched with my own glare. In that moment, I understood how alike we were. Both of us could be stubborn. I channeled my stubbornness into fighting in the ring. I never backed down. My dad took pride in winning arguments. Without saying anything more, Dad turned and walked away. Brad Jr. and Joanna looked at me as they left, shaking their heads, convinced I was the one in trouble. My mother and Georgia stayed behind, staring at Amy and me. After a moment, Georgia gave a final sad look and turned to leave. That left just my mother. You really pushed him too far this time, didn't you, Robbie? She said, concern on her face, not anger. I had never seen her look so torn. Maybe if you went after him to apologize. No, Hattie, I don't think that would help. I know I got my stubbornness from him. Why do you think I haven't forgiven any of you? Go, Hattie, follow your husband, but let me give you one piece of advice. She looked at me, waiting. Taking a deep breath, it was time to respond to my father. Tell Brad that if he tries any of the nonsense he just said, or if I hear him speaking badly about me to anyone, I will make sure this family and business suffer. You don't have the money for that, my mom started to say. That doesn't matter, I interrupted, shaking my head. If he wants a conflict, he will get one. I kept that place running for years despite everything. Look at what's happened. In just 1 year, you've lost over a third of your revenue. You are on the edge of losing many of your employees. A lot of items are returning to the workshop because they are not made well, and it seems that none of you can manage things without my help. If your husband really wants to argue, please remember what you saw in the ring tonight. Think about the focus and effort I needed to fight and win. Imagine what I would do in a disagreement with my family if I brought that focus and knowledge with me. Tell him, Hattie, to let it go. You know I will be fine without all of you. But please tell him to let it go, or it will be a tough situation for all of you. My mother looked at me, and for the first time, I saw sadness in her eyes. She knew it was true. If they came at me, they would be the ones in trouble. It won't help, Robbie, Mum sighed. He means what he said to you tonight. I've been trying to convince him, but he won't listen. Tears rolled down my mother's cheeks. Robbie, your father said that you were unexpected, and that's true, Mum whispered. But don't ever think you were a mistake. I love you, my dear boy, and I'm sorry. We should have never hidden Georgia and Brad's situation from you or about the child, but I won't regret my grandchild, even if it was unexpected. Mum paused, looking sad. She glanced at me as if she wanted to say more, then looked at Amy. Please, take care of my son for me. He's alone now, and he will need someone for what's coming. Oh, we saw tonight that Robbie knows how to handle himself, Amy replied with a hint of pride. Mum shook her head. Not like this. He doesn't. His father will come at him as he said he would. He will try to put Robbie down just to prove a point. For the first time, Tony stepped forward. Then you need to stand up to your husband, Hattie, Tony said. Tell him to back off. This is your son he's going after. Mum shook her head again. It won't help. Mum looked at me. I'm so sorry, Robbie. If I never see you again, please know that even though I can't say it again, I will always love you. You were the heart of this family, and we harmed you for no reason except our pride. You are the best of us. Always remember that. But do what you have to do. For what it's worth, Mum paused as her expression grew serious. I don't think the rest of them stand a chance, but I have to stand by my husband. I know, Mum, I replied, feeling sad. Suddenly she looked at me. It was the first time she had heard me call her Mum in over a year. She regarded me, then nodded gently. I will love you forever, Mum said, turning to head back to her family. Before she could fully turn, I rushed the few steps between us and gave her a big hug. For almost 2 minutes we stood there, unmoving. I realized my mother was caught in a difficult place. I understood how she thought. She needed to help as many family members as she could, even if it meant having to let go of one of us. We might have stayed in our embrace longer, but I heard my dad calling her name from far away. I let go of Mum. She turned to me, held my face gently, and kissed my cheek. Goodbye, Robbie, she whispered. Goodbye, Mum, I replied softly. We both cried as she walked away. Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.